Chapter 10 The King's Closet at the Tuileries. We will leave Villefort on the road to Paris, traveling, thanks to trebled fees, with all speed, and passing through 2 or 3 apartments. Enter at the Tuileries the little room with the arched window, so well known as having been the favorite closet of Napoleon and Louis Roman XVIII and now of Louis Philippe. There, seated before a walnut table he had brought with him from Hartwell, and to which, from one of those fancies not uncommon to great people, he was particularly attached, the king, Louis Roman XVIII, was carelessly listening to a man of 50 or 52 years of age, with grey hair, aristocratic bearing, and exceedingly gentlemanly attire, and meanwhile making a marginal note in a volume of Griffiths's rather inaccurate, but much sought-after, edition of Horace, a work which was much indebted to the sagacious observations of the philosophical monarch. "You say, sir," said the king, "that I am exceedingly disquieted, sire. Really, have you had a vision of the 7 fat kine and the 7 lean kine?" "No, sire, for that would only betoken for us 7 years of plenty and 7 years of scarcity, and with a king as full of foresight as your majesty, scarcity is not a thing to be feared." "Then of what other scourge are you afraid, my dear Blockus?" "Sire, I have every reason to believe that a storm is brewing in the south." "Well, my dear Duke," replied Louis Roman XVIII, "I think you are wrongly informed, and know positively that, on the contrary, it is very fine weather in that direction." Man of ability as he was, Louis Roman XVIII liked a pleasant jest. "Sire," continued M. de Blocas, "if it only be to reassure a faithful servant, will your majesty send into Languedoc, Provence, and Dauphin, trusty men, who will bring you back a faithful report as to the feeling in these 3 provinces?" "Canimus certes," replied the king, continuing the annotations in his Horace. "Sire," replied the courtier, laughing, in order that he may seem to comprehend the quotation, "your majesty may be perfectly right in relying on the good feeling of France, but I fear I am not altogether wrong in dreading some desperate attempt." "By whom?" "By Bonaparte, or, at least, by his adherents." "My dear Blockus," said the king, "you with your alarms prevent me from working." "And you, sire, prevent me from sleeping with your security." "Wait, my dear sir, wait a moment, for I have such a delightful note on the pastor quam traherit. Wait, and I will listen to you afterwards." There was a brief pause, during which Louis Roman XVIII wrote, in a hand as small as possible, another note on the margin of his Horace, and then looking at the Duke with the air of a man who thinks he has an idea of his own, while he is only commenting upon the idea of another, said, "Go on, my dear Duke, go on, I listen." "Sire," said Blockus, who had for a moment the hope of sacrificing Villefort to his own profit, "I am compelled to tell you that these are not mere rumors destitute of foundation which thus disquiet me, but a serious-minded man, deserving all my confidence, and charged by me to watch over the south." The Duke hesitated as he pronounced these words. "Has arrived by post to tell me that a great peril threatens the king, and so I hasten to you, sire." "Maledictus avidamum," continued Louis Roman XVIII, still annotating. "Does your majesty wish me to drop the subject?" "By no means, my dear Duke, but just stretch out your hand." Whichever you please, there to the left." "Here, sire?" "I tell you to the left, and you are looking to the right." "I mean on my left. Yes, there. You will find yesterday's report of the Minister of Police. But here is M. Dander himself, and M. Dander, announced by the chamberlain in waiting, entered. "Come in," said Louis Roman XVIII with repressed smile. "Come in, Baron, and tell the Duke all you know, the latest news of M. de Bonaparte. Do not conceal anything, however serious. Let us see. The island of Elba is a volcano, and we may expect to have issuing from their flaming and bristling war. Bella, horrida bella." M. Dander leaned very respectfully on the back of a chair with his 2 hands, and said, "Has your majesty perused yesterday's report?" "Yes, yes. But tell the Duke himself, who cannot find anything, what the report contains. Give him the particulars of what the usurper is doing in his islet." "Monsieur," said the Baron to the Duke, "all the servants of his majesty must approve of the latest intelligence which we have from the island of Elba." "Bonaparte, M." Dander looked at Louis Roman XVIII, who, employed in writing a note, did not evening raise his head. Bonaparte, continued the Baron, is mortally wearied, and passes whole days in watching his miners at work at Portalongon, and scratches himself for amusement, added the king. Scratches himself? Inquired the Duke. What does your Majesty mean? Yes, truly, my dear Duke. Did you forget that this great man, this hero, this demigod, is attacked with a malady of the skin which worries him to death, prurigo? And, moreover, my dear Duke, continued the Minister of Police, we are almost assured that, in a very short time, the usurper will be insane. Insane? Raving mad. His head becomes weaker. Sometimes he weeps bitterly, sometimes laughs boisterously. At other time he passes hours on the seashore, flinging stones in the water, and when the flint makes duck and drake 5 or 6 times, he appears as delighted as if he had gained another Marengo or Austerlitz. Now, you must agree that these are indubitable symptoms of insanity, or of wisdom, my dear Baron, or of wisdom, said Louis Roman 18, laughing. The greatest captains of antiquity amused themselves by casting pebbles into the ocean. See Plutarch's Life of Scipio Africanus. M. De Blocas pondered deeply between the confident monarch and the truthful minister. Villefort, who did not choose to reveal the whole secret, lest another should reap all the benefit of the disclosure, had yet communicated enough to cause him the greatest uneasiness. Well, well, Dander, said Louis Roman 18. Blocas is not yet convinced. Let us proceed, therefore, to the usurper's conversion. The Minister of Police bowed. The usurper's conversion, murmured the Duke, looking at the king and Dander, who spoke alternately, like Virgil's shepherds. The usurper converted. Decidedly, my dear Duke. In what way converted? To good principles. Tell him all about it, Baron. Why, this is the way of it, said the minister, with the gravest air in the world. Napoleon lately had a review, and as 2 or 3 of his old veterans expressed a desire to return to France, he gave them their dismissal, and exhorted them to serve the good king. These were his own words, of that I am certain. Well, Blocas, what think you of this? Inquired the king triumphantly, and pausing for a moment from the voluminous scholiast before him. I say, sire, that the Minister of Police is greatly deceived, or I am, and as it is impossible it can be the Minister of Police, as he has the guardianship of the safety and honor of your Majesty, it is probable that I am in error. However, sire, if I may advise, your Majesty will interrogate the person of whom I spoke to you, and I will urge your Majesty to do him this honor. Most willingly, Duke. Under your auspices I will receive any person you please, but you must not expect me to be too confiding. Baron, have you any report more recent than this, dated the 20th February, and this is the 3rd of March? No, sire, but I am hourly expecting one. It may have arrived since I left my office. Go there, and if there be none, well, well, continued Louis Roman 18. Make one. That is the usual way, is it not? And the king laughed facetiously. Oh, sire, replied the minister, we have no occasion to invent any. Every day our desks are loaded with most circumstantial denunciations, coming from hosts of people who hope for some return for services which they seek to render, but cannot. They trust to fortune, and rely upon some unexpected event in some way to justify their predictions. Well, sir, go, said Louis Roman 18, and remember that I am waiting for you. I will but go and return, sire. I shall be back in 10 minutes. And I, sire, said M. de Blocas, will go and find my messenger. Wait, sir, wait, said Louis Roman 18. Really, M. de Blocas, I must change your armorial bearings. I will give you an eagle with outstretched wings, holding in its claws a prey which tries in vain to escape, and bearing this device, Tenax. Sire, I listen, said de Blocas, biting his nails with impatience. I wish to consult you on this passage. Molly Fugian's Anhelitu. You know it refers to a stag flying from a wolf. Are you not a sportsman and a great wolf hunter? Well, then, what do you think of the Molly Anhelitu? Admirable, sire. But my messenger is like the stag you refer to, for he has posted 220 leagues in scarcely 3 days, which is undergoing great fatigue and anxiety, my dear Duke. when we have a telegraph which transmits messages in 3 or 4 hours, and that without getting in the least out of breath. Ah, sire, you recompense but badly this poor young man who has come so far, and with so much ardor, to give your majesty useful information, if only for the sake of M. de Salvia, who recommends him to me. I entreat your majesty to receive him graciously. M. de Salvia, my brother's chamberlain? Yes, sire, he is at Marseilles, and writes me from there. Does he speak to you of this conspiracy? No, but strongly recommends M. de Villefort, and begs me to present him to your majesty. M. de Villefort, cried the king, is the messenger's name M. de Villefort? Yes, sire, and he comes from Marseilles? In person. Why did you not mention his name at once? Replied the king, betraying some uneasiness. Sire, I thought his name was unknown to your majesty. No, no, Blockas, he's a man of strong and elevated understanding, ambitious, too, and part02. You know his father's name. His father? Yes, Noirtier the Girondin, Noirtier the senator, he himself. And your majesty has employed the son of such a man? Blockas, my friend, you have but limited comprehension. I told you Villefort was ambitious, and to attain this ambition Villefort would sacrifice everything, even his father. Then, sire, may I present him? This instant. Duke, where is he? Waiting below, in my carriage. Seek him at once. I hasten to do so. The Duke left the royal presence with the speed of a young man. His really sincere royalism made him youthful again. Louis Roman 18 remained alone, and turning his eyes on his half-opened Horace, muttered, Justum et tenacem propositi verum. M. de Blocas returned as speedily as he had departed, but in the antechamber he was forced to appeal to the king's authority. Villefort's dusty garb, his costume, which was not of courtly cut, excited the susceptibility of M. de Brézé, who was all astonishment at finding that this young man had the audacity to enter before the king in such attire. The Duke, however, overcame all difficulties with a word, His Majesty's order, and, in spite of the protestations which the master of ceremonies made for the honor of his office and principles, Villefort was introduced. The king was seated in the same place where the Duke had left him. On opening the door, Villefort found himself facing him, and the young magistrate's first impulse was to pause. Come in, M. de Villefort, said the king. Come in. Villefort bowed, and advancing a few steps, waited until the king should interrogate him. M. de Villefort, said Louis Roman 18, the Duc de Blocas assures me you have some interesting information to communicate. Sire, the Duke is right, and I believe your majesty will think it equally important. In the first place, and before everything else, sir, is the news as bad in your opinion as I am asked to believe? Sire, I believe it to be most urgent, but I hope, by the speed I have used, that it is not irreparable. Speak as fully as you please, sir, said the king, who began to give way to the emotion which had showed itself in Blocas's face and affected Villefort's voice. Speak, sir, and pray begin at the beginning. I like order in everything. Sire, said Villefort, I will render a faithful report to your majesty, but I must entreat your forgiveness if my anxiety leads to some obscurity in my language. A glance at the king after this discreet and subtle exordium assured Villefort of the benignity of his august auditor, and he went on. Sire, I have come as rapidly to Paris as possible to inform your majesty that I have discovered, in the exercise of my duties, not a commonplace and insignificant plot, such as is every day got up in the lower ranks of the people and in the army, but an actual conspiracy, a storm which menaces no less than your majesty's throne. Sire, the usurper is arming 3 ships. He meditates some project, which, however mad, is yet, perhaps, terrible. At this moment he will have left Elba, to go where I know not, but assuredly to attempt a landing either at Naples, or on the coast of Tuscany, or perhaps on the shores of France. Your Majesty is well aware that the sovereign of the island of Elba has maintained his relations with Italy and France. I am, sir, said the king, much agitated, and recently we have had information that the Bonapartist clubs have had meetings in the Rue Saint-Jacques. But proceed, I beg of you. How did you obtain these details? Sire, they are the results of an examination which I have made of a man of Marseille whom I have watched for some time and arrested on the day of my departure. This person, a sailor of turbulent character, and whom I suspected of Bonapartism, has been secretly to the island of Elba. There he saw the Grand Marshal, who charged him with an oral message to a Bonapartist in Paris, whose name I could not extract from him, but this mission was to prepare men's minds for a return. It is the man who says this, sire, a return which will soon occur. And where is this man? In prison, sire. And the matter seems serious to you? So serious, sire, that when the circumstance surprised me in the amid of a family festival on the very day of my betrothal, I left my bride and friends, postponing everything, that I may hasten to lay at your majesty's feet the fears which impressed me, and the assurance of my devotion. True, said Louis Roman 18. Was there not a marriage engagement between you and Mademoiselle de Saint-Emran, daughter of one of your majesty's most faithful servants? Yes, yes, but let us talk of this plot, M. de Villefort. Sire, I fear it is more than a plot. I fear it is a conspiracy. A conspiracy in these times, said Louis Roman 18 smiling, is a thing very easy to meditate, but more difficult to conduct to an end, inasmuch as re-established so recently on the throne of our ancestors, we have our eyes open at once upon the past, the present, and the future. For the last 10 months my ministers have redoubled their vigilance in order to watch the shore of the Mediterranean. If Bonaparte landed at Naples, the whole coalition would be on foot before he could even reach Piombino. If he land in Tuscany, he will be in an unfriendly territory. If he land in France, it must be with a handful of men, and the result of that is easily foretold, execrated as he is by the population. Take courage, sir, but at the same time rely on our royal gratitude. Ah, here is M. Dander, cried de Blocas. At this instant the minister of police appeared at the door, pale, trembling, and as if ready to faint. Villefort was about to retire, but M. Chapter 11. The Corsican Ogre. At the sight of this agitation Louis Roman 18 pushed from him violently the table at which he was sitting. What ails you, Baron? He exclaimed. You appear quite aghast. Has your uneasiness anything to do with what M. de Blocas has told me, and M. de Villefort has just confirmed? M. De Blocas moved suddenly towards the Baron, but the fright of the courtier pleaded for the forbearance of the statesman, and besides, as matters were, it was much more to his advantage that the prefect of police should triumph over him than that he should humiliate the prefect. Sire, stammered the Baron. Well, what is it? Asked Louis Roman 18. The minister of police, giving way to an impulse of despair, was about to throw himself at the feet of Louis Roman 18, who retreated a step and frowned. Will you speak? He said. Oh, sire, what a dreadful misfortune! I am, truly, to be pitied. I can never forgive myself. Monsieur, said Louis Roman 18, I command you to speak. Well, sire, the usurper left Elba on the 26th February and landed on the 1st of March. And where? In Italy? Asked the king eagerly. In France, sire, at a small port near Antibes in the Gulf of Juan. The usurper landed in France, near Antibes, in the Gulf of Juan, 250 leagues from Paris, on the 1st of March, and you only acquired this information today, the 3rd of March. Well, sir, what you tell me is impossible. You must have received a false report, or you have gone mad. Alas, sire, it is but too true. Louis made a gesture of indescribable anger and alarm, and then drew himself up as if this sudden blow had struck him at the same moment in heart and countenance. In France, he cried, the usurper in France. Then they did not watch over this man. Who knows? They were, perhaps, in league with him. Oh, sire, exclaimed the Duc de Blocas, M. Dander is not a man to be accused of treason. Sire, we have all been blind, and the minister of police has shared the general blindness, that is all. But, said Villefort, and then suddenly checking himself, he was silent. Then he continued, Your pardon, sire, he said, bowing, my zeal carried me away. Will your majesty deign to excuse me? Speak, sir, speak boldly, replied Louis. You alone forewarned us of the evil. Now try and aid us with the remedy. Sire, said Villefort, the usurper is detested in the south, and it seems to me that if he ventured into the south, it would be easy to raise Languedoc and Provence against him. Yes, assuredly, replied the minister, but he is advancing by Gap and Cistern. Advancing, he is advancing, said Louis Roman 18. Is he then advancing on Paris? The minister of police maintained a silence, which was equivalent to a complete avowal. And Dauphin, sir? Inquired the king of Villefort. Do you think it possible to rouse that as well as Provence? Sire, I am sorry to tell your majesty a cruel fact, but the feeling in Dauphin is quite the reverse of that in Provence or Languedoc. The mountaineers are Bonapartists, sire. Then, murmured Louis, he was well informed. And how many men had he with him? I do not know, sire, answered the minister of police. What? You do not know? Have you neglected to obtain information on that point? Of course it is of no consequence, he added, with a withering smile. Sire, it was impossible to learn. The dispatch simply stated the fact of the landing and the route taken by the usurper. And how did this dispatch reach you? Inquired the king. The minister bowed his head, and while a deep color overspread his cheeks, he stammered out, "By the telegraph, sire." Louis Roman 18 advanced a step and folded his arms over his chest as Napoleon would have done. So then, he exclaimed, turning pale with anger, 7 conjoined and allied armies overthrew that man. A miracle of heaven replaced me on the throne of my fathers after 25 years of exile. I have, during those 25 years, spared no pains to understand the people of France and the interests which were confided to me, and now, when I see the fruition of my wishes almost within reach, the power I hold in my hands bursts and shatters me to atoms. Sire, it is fatality, murmured the minister, feeling that the pressure of circumstances, however light a thing to destiny, was too much for any human strength to endure. What our enemies say of us is then true. We have learnt nothing, forgotten nothing. If I were betrayed as he was, I would console myself. But to be in the midst of persons elevated by myself to places of honor, who ought to watch over me more carefully than over themselves, for my fortune is theirs. Before me they were nothing, after me they will be nothing, and perish miserably from incapacity, ineptitude. Oh, yes, sir, you are right, it is fatality. The minister quailed before this outburst of sarcasm. M. de Blocas wiped the moisture from his brow. Villefort smiled within himself, for he felt his increased importance. To fall, continued King Louis, who at the first glance had sounded the abyss on which the monarchy hung suspended, to fall, and learn of that fall by telegraph. Oh, I would rather mount the scaffold of my brother, Louis Roman 16, than thus descend the staircase at the Tuileries driven away by ridicule. Ridicule, sir? Why, you know not its power in France, and yet you ought to know it. Sire, sire, murmured the minister, for pity's approach. M. de Villefort, resumed the king, addressing the young man who, motionless and breathless, was listening to a conversation on which depended the destiny of a kingdom. Approach, and tell monsieur that it is possible to know beforehand all that he has not known. Sire, it was really impossible to learn secrets which that man concealed from all the world. Really impossible. Yes, that is a great word, sir. Unfortunately, there are great words as there are great men. I have measured them. Really impossible for a minister who has an office, agents, spies, and 1,500,000 francs for secret service money to know what is going on at 60 leagues from the coast of France. Well, then, see, here is a gentleman who had none of these resources at his disposal, a gentleman, only a simple magistrate, who learned more than you with all your police, and who would have saved my crown, if, like you, he had the power of directing a telegraph. The look of the minister of police was turned with concentrated spite on Villefort, who bent his head in modest triumph. I do not mean that for you, Blocas, continued Louis Roman 18, for if you have discovered nothing, At least you have had the good sense to persevere in your suspicions. Any other than yourself would have considered the disclosure of M. de Villefort insignificant, or else dictated by venal ambition. These words were an allusion to the sentiments which the Minister of Police had uttered with so much confidence an hour before. Villefort understood the king's intent. Any other person would, perhaps, have been overcome by such an intoxicating draught of praise, but he feared to make for himself a mortal enemy of the police minister, although he saw that dander was irrevocably lost. In fact, the minister, who, in the plenitude of his power, had been unable to unearth Napoleon's secret, may, in despair at his own downfall, interrogate Dance and so lay bare the motives of Villefort's plot. Realizing this, Villefort came to the rescue of the crestfallen minister, instead of aiding to crush him. "Sire," said Villefort, "the suddenness of this event must prove to your Majesty that the issue is in the hands of Providence. What your Majesty is pleased to attribute to me as profound perspicacity is simply owing to chance, and I have profited by that chance, like a good and devoted servant. That's all. Do not attribute to me more than I deserve, sire, that your Majesty may never have occasion to recall the first opinion you have been pleased to form of me." The Minister of Police thanked the young man by an eloquent look, and Villefort understood that he had succeeded in his design, that is to say, that without forfeiting the gratitude of the king, he had made a friend of one on whom, in case of necessity, he may rely. "It is well," resumed the king. "And now, gentlemen," he continued, turning towards M. de Blocas and the Minister of Police, "I have no further occasion for you, and you may retire. What now remains to do is in the department of the Minister of War." "Fortunately, sire," said M. de Blocas, "we can rely on the army. Your Majesty knows how every report confirms their loyalty and attachment. Do not mention reports, Duke, to me, for I know now what confidence to place in them. Yet, speaking of reports, Baron, what have you learned with regard to the affair in the Rue Saint-Jacques?" "The affair in the Rue Saint-Jacques," exclaimed Villefort, unable to repress an exclamation. Then, suddenly pausing, he added, "Your pardon, sire, but my devotion to your Majesty has made me forget, not the respect I have, for that is too deeply engraved in my heart, but the rules of etiquette." Go on, sir," replied the king. "You have today earned the right to make inquiries here." "Sire," interposed the Minister of Police, "I came a moment ago to give your Majesty fresh information which I had obtained on this head, when your Majesty's attention was attracted by the terrible event that has occurred in the Gulf, and now these facts will cease to interest your Majesty." "On the contrary, sir, on the contrary," said Louis Roman XVIII. "This affair seems to me to have a decided connection with that which occupies our attention, and the death of General Quesnel will, perhaps, put us on the direct track of a great internal conspiracy." At the name of General Quesnel, Villefort trembled. "Everything points to the conclusion, sire," said the Minister of Police, "that death was not the result of suicide, as we first believed, but of assassination. General Quesnel, it appears, had just left a Bonapartist club when he disappeared. An unknown person had been with him that morning, and made an appointment with him in the Rue Saint-Jacques. Unfortunately, the general's valet, who was dressing his hair at the moment when the stranger entered, heard the street mentioned, but did not catch the number." As the police minister related this to the king, Villefort, who looked as if his very life hung on the speaker's lips, turned alternately red and pale. The king looked towards him. "Do you not think with me, M. de Villefort, that General Quesnel, whom they believed attached to the usurper, but who was really entirely devoted to me, has perished the victim of a Bonapartist ambush?" "It is probable, sire," replied Villefort. "But is this all that is known?" "They are on the track of the man who appointed the meeting with him." "On his track," said Villefort. "Yes, the servant has given his description. He is a man of from 50 to 52 years of age, dark, with black eyes covered with shaggy eyebrows, and a thick mustache. He was dressed in a blue frock coat, buttoned up to the chin, and wore at his buttonhole the rosette of an officer of the Legion of Honor. Yesterday a person exactly corresponding with this description was followed, but he was lost sight of at the corner of the Rue de la Jussienne and the Rue Coquetron. Villefort leaned on the back of an armchair, for as the minister of police went on speaking he felt his legs bend under him. But when he learned that the unknown had escaped the vigilance of the agent who followed him, he breathed again. "Continue to seek for this man, sir," said the king to the minister of police, "for if, as I am all but convinced, General Quesnel, who would have been so useful to us at this moment, has been murdered, his assassins, Bonapartists or not, shall be cruelly punished." It required all Villefort's coolness not to betray the terror with which this declaration of the king inspired him. "How strange," continued the king, with some asperity, "the police think that they have disposed of the whole matter when they say a murder has been committed, and especially so when they can add, and we are on the track of the guilty persons. Sire, your majesty will, I trust, be amply satisfied on this point at least. We shall see. I will no longer detain you, M. de Villefort, for you must be fatigued after so long a journey. Go and rest. Of course you stopped at your father's?" A feeling of faintness came over Villefort. "No, sire," he replied, "I alighted at the Hotel de Madrid, in the Rue de Tournon." "But you have seen him?" "Sire, I went straight to the Duc de Blacas." "But you will see him, then?" "I think not, sire." "Ah, I forgot," said Louis, smiling in a manner which proved that all these questions were not made without a motive. "I forgot you and M. Noirtier are not on the best terms possible, and that is another sacrifice made to the royal cause, and for which you should be recompensed." "Sire, the kindness your majesty deigns to evince towards me is a recompense which so far surpasses my utmost ambition that I have nothing more to ask for." "Never mind, sir, we will not forget you. Make your mind easy." In the meanwhile the king here detached the cross of the Legion of Honor, which he usually wore over his blue coat, near the cross of St. Louis, above the order of Notre Dame du Mont Carmel and St. Lazare, and gave it to Villefort. "In the meanwhile take this cross." "Sire," said Villefort, "your majesty mistakes. This is an officer's cross." "Ma foi," said Louis Roman 18, "take it, such as it is, for I have not the time to procure you another. Blacas, let it be your care to see that the brevet is made out and sent to M. de Villefort." Villefort's eyes were filled with tears of joy and pride. He took the cross and kissed it. "And now," he said, "may I inquire what are the orders with which your majesty deigns to honor me? Take what rest you require, and remember that if you are not able to serve me here in Paris, you may be of the greatest service to me at Marseilles." "Sire," replied Villefort, bowing, "in an hour I shall have quitted Paris." "Go, sir," said the king, "and should I forget you kings' memories are short, do not be afraid to bring yourself to my recollection. Baron, send for the Minister of War. Blacas, remain." "Ah, sir," said the Minister of Police to Villefort, as they left the Tuileries, "you entered by Luck's door, your fortune is made." "Will it be long first?" muttered Villefort, saluting the minister, whose career was ended, and looking about him for a hackney coach. One passed at the moment, which he hailed. He gave his address to the driver, and springing in, threw himself on the seat and gave loose to dreams of ambition. 10 minutes afterwards Villefort reached his hotel, ordered horses to be ready in 2 hours, and asked to have his breakfast brought to him. He was about to begin his repast, when the sound of the bell rang sharp and loud. The valet opened the door, and Villefort heard someone speak his name. "Who could know that I was here already?" said the young man. The valet entered. "Well," said Villefort, "what is it? Who rang? Who asked for me?" "A stranger who will not send in his name." "A stranger who will not send in his name. What can he want with me?" "He wishes to speak to you." "To me?" "Yes." "Did he mention my name?" "Yes." "What sort of person is he?" "Why, sir, a man of about 50. Short or tall?" "About your own height, sir." "Dark or fair?" "Dark, very dark, with black eyes, black hair, black eyebrows." "And how dressed?" asked Villefort quickly. "In a blue frock coat, buttoned up close, decorated with the Legion of Honor." "It is he," said Villefort, turning pale. "part02," said the individual whose description we have twice given, entering the door. What a great deal of ceremony! Is it the custom in Marseille for sons to keep their fathers waiting in their anterooms? Father, cried Villefort, then I was not deceived. I felt sure it must be you. Well, then, if you felt so sure, replied the newcomer, putting his cane in a corner and his hat on a chair, allow me to say, my dear guard, that it was not very filial of you to keep me waiting at the door. Leave us, Germain, said Villefort. Chapter 12. Father and Son. Noirtier, for it was, truly, he who entered, looked after the servant until the door was closed, and then, fearing, no doubt, that he may be overheard in the antechamber, he opened the door again, nor was the precaution useless, as appeared from the rapid retreat of Germain, who proved that he was not exempt from the sin which ruined our first parents. Noirtier then took the trouble to close and bolt the antechamber door, then that of the bedchamber, and then extended his hand to Villefort, who had followed all his motions with surprise which he could not conceal. Well, now, my dear guard, said he to the young man, with a very significant look, do you know, you seem as if you were not very glad to see me. My dear father, said Villefort, I am, on the contrary, delighted, but I so little expected your visit, that it has somewhat overcome me. But, my dear fellow, replied Noirtier, seating himself, I may say the same thing to you. When you announce to me your wedding for the 28th of February, and on the 3rd of March you turn up here in Paris. And if I have come, my dear father, said Grard, drawing closer to Noirtier, do not complain, for it is for you that I came, and my journey will be your salvation. Ah, truly, said Noirtier, stretching himself out at his ease in the chair. Really, pray tell me all about it, for it must be interesting. Father, you have heard speak of a certain Bonapartist club in the Rue Saint-Jacques? No, 53. Yes, I am vice-president. Father, your coolness makes me shudder. Why, my dear boy, when a man has been proscribed by the mountaineers, has escaped from Paris in a hay-cart, been hunted over the plains of Bordeaux by Robespierre's bloodhounds, he becomes accustomed to most things. But go on. What about the club in the Rue Saint-Jacques? Why, they induced General Quesnel to go there, and General Quesnel, who quitted his own house at 9 o'clock in the evening, was found the next day in the Seine. And who told you this fine story? The king himself. Well, then, in return for your story, continued Noirtier, I will tell you another. My dear father, I think I already know what you are about to tell me. Ah, you have heard of the landing of the emperor? Not so loud, father, I entreat of you, for your own sake as well as mine. Yes, I heard this news, and knew it evening before you could, for 3 days ago I posted from Marseille to Paris with all possible speed, half desperate at the enforced delay. 3 days ago? You are crazy. Why, 3 days ago the emperor had not landed. No matter, I was aware of his intention. How did you know about it? By a letter addressed to you from the island of Elba. To me, to you, and which I discovered in the pocket-book of the messenger. Had that letter fallen into the hands of another, you, my dear father, would probably before this have been shot. Villefort's father laughed. Come, come, said he, will the Restoration adopt imperial methods so promptly? Shot, my dear boy? What an idea! Where is the letter you speak of? I know you too well to suppose you would allow such a thing to pass you. I burnt it, for fear that evening a fragment should remain, for that letter must have led to your condemnation, and the destruction of your future prospects, replied Noirtier. Yes, I can easily comprehend that. But I have nothing to fear while I have you to protect me. I do better than that, sir. I save you. You do? Why, really, the thing becomes more and more dramatic. Explain yourself. I must refer again to the club in the Rue Saint-Jacques. It appears that this club is rather a bore to the police. Why didn't they search more vigilantly? They would have found. They have not found, but they are on the track. Yes, that's the usual phrase. I am quite familiar with it. When the police is at fault, it declares that it is on the track, and the government patiently awaits the day when it comes to say, with a sneaking air, that the track is lost. Yes, but they have found a corpse. The general has been killed, and in all countries they call that a murder. A murder, do you call it? Why, there is nothing to prove that the general was murdered. People are found every day in the Seine, having thrown themselves in, or having been drowned from not knowing how to swim. Father, you know very well that the general was not a man to drown himself in despair, and people do not bathe in the Seine in the month of January. No, no, do not be deceived. This was murder in every sense of the word. And who thus designated it? The king himself. The king. I thought he was philosopher enough to allow that there was no murder in politics. In politics, my dear fellow, you know, as well as I do, there are no men, but ideas, no feelings, but interests. In politics, we do not kill a man, we only remove an obstacle, that is all. Would you like to know how matters have progressed? Well, I will tell you. It was thought reliance may be placed in General Quesnel. He was recommended to us from the island of Elba. One of us went to him and invited him to the Rue Saint Jacques, where he would find some friends. He came there, and the plan was unfolded to him for leaving Elba, the projected landing, etc. When he had heard and comprehended all to the fullest extent, he replied that he was a royalist. Then all looked at each other. He was made to take an oath, and did so, but with such an ill grace that it was really tempting Providence to swear thus, and yet, in spite of that, the general was allowed to depart free, perfectly free. Yet he did not return home. What could that mean? Why, my dear fellow, that on leaving us he lost his way, that's all. A murder? Really, Villefort, you surprise me. You, a deputy procureur, to found an accusation on such bad premises. Did I ever say to you, when you were fulfilling your character as a royalist, and cut off the head of one of my party, my son, you have committed a murder? No, I said, very well, sir, you have gained the victory. Tomorrow, perhaps, it will be our turn. But, father, take care. When our turn comes, our revenge will be sweeping. I do not understand you. You rely on the usurper's return? We do. You are mistaken. He will not advance 2 leagues into the interior of France without being followed, tracked, and caught like a wild beast. My dear fellow, the emperor is at this moment on the way to Grenoble. On the 10th or 12th he will be at Lyons, and on the 20th or 25th at Paris. The people will rise. Yes, to go and meet him. He has but a handful of men with him, and armies will be dispatched against him. Yes, to escort him into the capital. Really, my dear Grard, you are but a child. You think yourself well informed because the telegraph has told you. 3 days after the landing, the usurper has landed at Cannes with several men. He is pursued. But where is he? What is he doing? You do not know at all, and in this way they will chase him to Paris, without drawing a trigger. Grenoble and Lyons are faithful cities and will oppose to him an impassable barrier. Grenoble will open her gates to him with enthusiasm. All Lyons will hasten to welcome him. Believe me, we are as well informed as you, and our police are as good as your own. Would you like a proof of it? Well, you wished to conceal your journey from me, and yet I knew of your arrival half an hour after you had passed the barrier. You gave your direction to no one but your postilion, yet I have your address, and in proof I am here the very instant you are going to sit at table. Ring, then, if you please, for a second knife, fork, and plate, and we will dine together. Truly, replied Villefort, looking at his father with astonishment, you really do seem very well informed. Eh? The thing is simple enough. You who are in power have only the means that money produces. We who are in expectation have those which devotion prompts. Devotion, said Villefort, with a sneer. Yes, devotion, for that is, I believe, the phrase for hopeful ambition. And Villefort's father extended his hand to the bell rope, to summon the servant whom his son had not called. Villefort caught his arm. Wait, my dear father, said the young man, one word more. Say on. However stupid the royalist police may be, they do know one terrible thing. What is that? The description of the man who, on the morning of the day when General Quesnel disappeared, presented himself at his house. Oh, the admirable police have found that out, have they? And what may be that description? dark complexion, hair, eyebrows, and whiskers black, blue frock coat, buttoned up to the chin, rosette of an officer of the Legion of Honor in his buttonhole, a hat with wide brim, and a cane. "Ah, ha, that's it, is it?" said Noirtier. "And why, then, have they not laid hands on him?" Illustration: the changed clothes, because yesterday, or the day before, they lost sight of him at the corner of the Rue Coquetron. "Didn't I say that your police were good for nothing?" "Yes, but they may catch him yet." "True," said Noirtier, looking carelessly around him. "True, if this person were not on his guard, as he is," and he added with a smile, "he will consequently make a few changes in his personal appearance." At these words he rose, and put off his frock coat and cravat, went towards a table on which lay his son's toilet articles, lathered his face, took a razor, and, with a firm hand, cut off the compromising whiskers. Villefort watched him with alarm not devoid of admiration. His whiskers cut off, Noirtier gave another turn to his hair, took, instead of his black cravat, a colored neckerchief which lay at the top of an open portmanteau, put on, in lieu of his blue and high-buttoned frock coat, a coat of Villefort's of dark brown, and cut away in front, tried on before the glass a narrow-brimmed hat of his son's, which appeared to fit him perfectly, and, leaving his cane in the corner where he had deposited it, he took up a small bamboo switch, cut the air with it once or twice, and walked about with that easy swagger which was one of his principal characteristics. "Well," he said, turning towards his wondering son, when this disguise was completed, "well, do you think your police will recognize me now?" "No, father," stammered Villefort, "at least, I hope not." "And now, my dear boy," continued Noirtier, "I rely on your prudence to remove all the things which I leave in your care." "Oh, rely on me," said Villefort. "Yes, yes, and now I believe you are right, and that you have really saved my life. Be assured I will return the favor hereafter." Villefort shook his head. "You are not convinced yet? I hope, at least, that you may be mistaken. Shall you see the king again? Perhaps. Would you pass in his eyes for a prophet? Prophets of evil are not in favor at the court, father. True, but some day they do them justice, and supposing a second restoration, you would then pass for a great man. Well, what should I say to the king? Say this to him: Sire, you are deceived as to the feeling in France, as to the opinions of the towns, and the prejudices of the army. He whom in Paris you call the Corsican ogre, who at Nevers is styled the usurper, is already saluted as Bonaparte at Lyons, and Emperor at Grenoble. You think he is tracked, pursued, captured. He is advancing as rapidly as his own eagles. The soldiers you believe to be dying with hunger, worn out with fatigue, ready to desert, gather like atoms of snow about the rolling ball as it hastens onward. Sire, go, leave France to its real master, to him who acquired it, not by purchase, but by right of conquest. Go, sire, not that you incur any risk, for your adversary is powerful enough to show you mercy, but because it would be humiliating for a grandson of St. Louis to owe his life to the man of Arcola, Marengo, Austerlitz. Tell him this, Grard, or, rather, tell him nothing. Keep your journey a secret. Do not boast of what you have come to Paris to do, or have done. Return with all speed. Enter Marseille at night, and your house by the back door, and there remain, quiet, submissive, secret, and, above all, inoffensive. For this time, I swear to you, we shall act like powerful men who know their enemies. Go, my son, go, my dear Grard, and by your obedience to my paternal orders, or, if you prefer it, friendly counsels, we will keep you in your place. This will be, added Noirtier, with a smile, one means by which you may a second time save me, if the political balance should some day take another turn, and cast you aloft while hurling me down. Adieu, my dear Grard, and at your next journey alight at my door." Noirtier left the room. When he had finished, with the same calmness that had characterized him during the whole of this remarkable and trying conversation. Villefort, pale and agitated, ran to the window, put aside the curtain, and saw him pass, cool and collected, by 2 or 3 ill-looking men at the corner of the street, who were there, perhaps, to arrest a man with black whiskers and a blue frock coat and hat with broad brim. Villefort stood watching, breathless, until his father had disappeared at the Rue Bussy. Chapter 13. The 100 Days. Noirtier was a true prophet, and things progressed rapidly as he had predicted. Everyone knows the history of the famous return from Elba, a return which was unprecedented in the past, and will probably remain without a counterpart in the future. Louis Roman XVIII made but a faint attempt to parry this unexpected blow. The monarchy he had scarcely reconstructed tottered on its precarious foundation, and at a sign from the emperor the incongruous structure of ancient prejudices and new ideas fell to the ground. Villefort, therefore, gained nothing save the king's gratitude, which was rather likely to injure him at the present time, and the cross of the Legion of Honor, which he had the prudence not to wear, although M. de Blocas had duly forwarded the brevet. Napoleon would, doubtless, have deprived Villefort of his office had it not been for Noirtier, who was all-powerful at court, and thus the Girondin of '93 and the Senator of 1806 protected him who so lately had been his protector. All Villefort's influence barely enabled him to stifle the secret dance had so nearly divulged. The king's procureur alone was deprived of his office, being suspected of royalism. However, scarcely was the imperial power established, that is, scarcely had the emperor re-entered the Tuileries and begun to issue orders from the closet into which we have introduced our readers, he found on the table their Louis X Roman VI. Half-filled snuff-box. Scarcely had this occurred when Marseille began, in spite of the authorities, to rekindle the flames of civil war, always smoldering in the south, and it required but little to excite the populace to acts of far greater violence than the shouts and insults with which they assailed the royalists whenever they ventured abroad. 0159M. Owing to this change, the worthy shipowner became at that moment, we will not say all-powerful, because Morel was a prudent and rather a timid man, so much so that many of the most zealous partisans of Bonaparte accused him of moderation, but sufficiently influential to make a demand in favor of dance. Villefort retained his place, but his marriage was put off until a more favorable opportunity. If the emperor remained on the throne, Garde required a different alliance to aid his career. If Louis Roman XVIII returned, the influence of M. de Saint-Emran, like his own, could be vastly increased, and the marriage be still more suitable. The deputy procureur was, therefore, the first magistrate of Marseille, when one morning his door opened, and M. Morel was announced. Anyone else would have hastened to receive him, but Villefort was a man of ability, and he knew this would be a sign of weakness. He made Morel wait in the antechamber, although he had no one with him, for the simple reason that the king's procureur always makes everyone wait, and after passing a quarter of an hour in reading the papers, he ordered M. Morel to be admitted. Morel expected Villefort would be dejected. He found him as he had found him 6 weeks before, calm, firm, and full of that glacial politeness, that most insurmountable barrier which separates the well-bred from the vulgar man. He had entered Villefort's office expecting that the magistrate would tremble at the sight of him. On the contrary, he felt a cold shudder all over him when he saw Villefort sitting there with his elbow on his desk, and his head leaning on his hand. He stopped at the door. Villefort gazed at him as if he had some difficulty in recognizing him. Then, after a brief interval, during which the honest shipowner turned his hat in his hands, M. Morel, I believe, said Villefort. Yes, sir. Come nearer, said the magistrate, with a patronizing wave of the hand, and tell me to what circumstance I owe the honor of this visit. Do you not guess, monsieur? Asked Morel. Not in the least, but if I can serve you in any way I shall be delighted. Everything depends on you. Explain yourself, pray, monsieur, said Morel, recovering his assurance as he proceeded. Do you recollect that a few days before the landing of His Majesty the Emperor, I came to intercede for a young man, the mate of my ship, who was accused of being concerned in correspondence with the island of Elba. What was the other day a crime is today a title to favor. You then served Louis Roman 18 and you did not show any favor. It was your duty. Today you serve Napoleon, and you ought to protect him. It is equally your duty. I come, therefore, to ask what has become of him. Villefort by a strong effort sought to control himself. What is his name? Said he. Tell me his name. Edmond Dance. Villefort would probably have rather stood opposite the muzzle of a pistol at 25 paces than have heard this name spoken, but he did not blanch. Dance, repeated he. Edmond Dance. Yes, monsieur. Villefort opened a large register, then went to a table, from the table turned to his registers, and then, turning to Morel, "Are you quite sure you are not mistaken, monsieur?" said he, in the most natural tone in the world. Had Morel been a more quick-sighted man, or better versed in these matters, he would have been surprised at the king's procureur answering him on such a subject, instead of referring him to the governors of the prison or the prefect of the department. But Morel, disappointed in his expectations of exciting fear, was conscious only of the other's condescension. Villefort had calculated rightly. "No," said Morel, "I am not mistaken. I have known him for 10 years, the last 4 of which he was in my service. Do not you recollect? I came about 6 weeks ago to plead for clemency, as I come today to plead for justice. You received me very coldly. Oh, the Royalists were very severe with the Bonapartists in those days." "Monsieur," returned Villefort, "I was then a Royalist because I believed the Bourbons not only the heirs to the throne, but the chosen of the nation. The miraculous return of Napoleon has conquered me. The legitimate monarch is he who is loved by his people." "That's right," cried Morel. "I like to hear you speak thus, and I augur well for Edmond from it." "Wait a moment," said Villefort, turning over the leaves of a register. "I have it, a sailor, who was about to marry a young Catalan girl. I recollect now. It was a very serious charge." "How so?" "You know that when he left here he was taken to the Palais de Justice. Well, I made my report to the authorities at Paris, and a week after he was carried off." "Carried off," said Morel. "What can they have done with him?" "Oh, he has been taken to Fenestrelles, to Pignerol, or to the St. Marguerite Islands. Some fine morning he will return to take command of your vessel. Come when he will, it shall be kept for him." "But how is it he is not already returned?" "It seems to me the first care of government should be to set at liberty those who have suffered for their adherence to it." "Do not be too hasty, M. Morel," replied Villefort. "The order of imprisonment came from high authority, and the order for his liberation must proceed from the same source, and, as Napoleon has scarcely been reinstated a fortnight, the letters have not yet been forwarded." "But," said Morel, "is there no way of expediting all these formalities, of releasing him from arrest?" "There has been no arrest." "How?" "It is sometimes essential to government to cause a man's disappearance without leaving any traces, so that no written forms or documents may defeat their wishes. It may be so under the Bourbons, but at present, it has always been so, my dear Morel, since the reign of Louis Roman 14. The Emperor is more strict in prison discipline than even Louis himself, and the number of prisoners whose names are not on the register is incalculable. Had Morel evening any suspicions, so much kindness would have dispelled them." "Well, M. de Villefort, how would you advise me to act?" asked he. "Petition the minister." "Oh, I know what that is. The minister receives 200 petitions every day, and does not read 3. That is true. But he will read a petition countersigned and presented by me." "And will you undertake to deliver it?" "With the greatest pleasure." Dance was then guilty, and now he is innocent, and it is as much my duty to free him as it was to condemn him. Villefort thus forestalled any danger of an inquiry, which, however improbable it may be, if it did take place, would leave him defenseless. "But how shall I address the minister?" "Sit down there," said Villefort, giving up his place to Morel, "and write what I dictate." "Will you be so good?" "Certainly. But lose no time. We have lost too much already." "That is true. Only think what the poor fellow may evening now be suffering." Villefort shuddered at the suggestion. but he had gone too far to draw back. Dance must be crushed to gratify Villefort's ambition. Villefort dictated a petition in which, from an excellent intention, no doubt, Dance's patriotic services were exaggerated, and he was made out one of the most active agents of Napoleon's return. It was evident that at the sight of this document the minister would instantly release him. The petition finished, Villefort read it aloud. "That will do," said he. "Leave the rest to me." "Will the petition go soon?" "Today, countersigned by you. The best thing I can do will be to certify the truth of the contents of your petition." And, sitting down, Villefort wrote the certificate at the bottom. "What more is to be done? I will do whatever is necessary." This assurance delighted Morrel, who took leave of Villefort, and hastened to announce to old Dance that he would soon see his son. As for Villefort, instead of sending to Paris, he carefully preserved the petition that so fearfully compromised Dance, in the hopes of an event that seemed not unlikely, that is, a second restoration. Dance remained a prisoner, and heard not the noise of the fall of Louis X Roman VI. Throne, or the still more tragic destruction of the empire. Twice during the 100 days had Morrel renewed his demand, and twice had Villefort soothed him with promises. At last there was Waterloo, and Morrel came no more. He had done all that was in his power, and any fresh attempt would only compromise himself uselessly. Louis Roman XVIII remounted the throne. Villefort, to whom Marseille had become filled with remorseful memories, sought and obtained the situation of king's procureur at Toulouse, and a fortnight afterwards he married Mademoiselle de Saint-Emran, whose father now stood higher at court than ever. And so Dance, after the 100 days and after Waterloo, remained in his dungeon, forgotten of earth and heaven. Danglars comprehended the full extent of the wretched fate that overwhelmed Dance, and when Napoleon returned to France, he, after the manner of mediocre minds, termed the coincidence a decree of Providence. But when Napoleon returned to Paris, Danglars' heart failed him, and he lived in constant fear of Dance's return on a mission of vengeance. He therefore informed M. Morrel of his wish to quit the sea, and obtained a recommendation from him to a Spanish merchant, into whose service he entered at the end of March, that is, 10 or 12 days after Napoleon's return. He then left for Madrid, and was no more heard of. Fernand understood nothing except that Dance was absent. What had become of him he cared not to inquire. Only, during the respite the absence of his rival afforded him, he reflected, partly on the means of deceiving Merkz as to the cause of his absence, partly on plans of emigration and abduction, as from time to time he sat sad and motionless on the summit of Cape Pharaoh, at the spot from where Marseille and the Catalans are visible, watching for the apparition of a young and handsome man, who was for him also the messenger of vengeance. Fernand's mind was made up. He would shoot Dance, and then kill himself. But Fernand was mistaken. A man of his disposition never kills himself, for he constantly hopes. During this time the empire made its last conscription, and every man in France capable of bearing arms rushed to obey the summons of the emperor. Fernand departed with the rest, bearing with him the terrible thought that while he was away, his rival would perhaps return and marry Merkz. Had Fernand really meant to kill himself, he would have done so when he parted from Merkz. His devotion, and the compassion he showed for her misfortunes, produced the effect they always produce on noble minds. Merkz had always had a sincere regard for Fernand, and this was now strengthened by gratitude. "My brother," said she, as she placed his knapsack on his shoulders, "be careful of yourself, for if you are killed, I shall be alone in the world." These words carried a ray of hope into Fernand's heart. Should Dance not return, Merkz may one day be his. Merkz was left alone face to face with the vast plain that had never seemed so barren, and the sea that had never seemed so vast. Bathed in tears, she wandered about the Catalan village. Sometimes she stood mute and motionless as a statue, looking towards Marseille, at other times gazing on the sea, and debating as to whether it were not better to cast herself into the abyss of the ocean, and thus end her woes. It was not want of courage that prevented her putting this resolution into execution, but her religious feelings came to her aid and saved her. Cadros was, like Fernand, enrolled in the army, but, being married and 8 years older, he was merely sent to the frontier. Old Dance, who was only sustained by hope, lost all hope at Napoleon's downfall. 5 months after he had been separated from his son, and almost at the hour of his arrest, he breathed his last in Merck's arms. Morel paid the expenses of his funeral, and a few small debts the poor old man had contracted. Chapter 14. The Two Prisoners. A year after Louis X Roman VI. Restoration, a visit was made by the Inspector General of Prisons. Dance in his cell heard the noise of preparation, sounds that at the depth where he lay would have been inaudible to any but the ear of a prisoner, who could hear the splash of the drop of water that every hour fell from the roof of his dungeon. He guessed something uncommon was passing among the living, but he had so long ceased to have any intercourse with the world that he looked upon himself as dead. The inspector visited, one after another, the cells and dungeons of several of the prisoners, whose good behavior or stupidity recommended them to the clemency of the government. He inquired how they were fed, and if they had any request to make. The universal response was that the fare was detestable, and that they wanted to be set free. The inspector asked if they had anything else to ask for. They shook their heads. What could they desire beyond their liberty? The inspector turned smilingly to the governor. I do not know what reason government can assign for these useless visits. When you see one prisoner, you see all, always the same thing, ill-fed and innocent. Are there any others? Yes, the dangerous and mad prisoners are in the dungeons. Let us visit them, said the inspector with an air of fatigue. We must play the farce to the end. Let us see the dungeons. Let us first send for 2 soldiers, said the governor. The prisoners sometimes, through mere uneasiness of life, and in order to be sentenced to death, commit acts of useless violence, and you may fall a victim. Take all needful precautions, replied the inspector. 2 soldiers were accordingly sent for, and the inspector descended a stairway, so foul, so humid, so dark, as to be loathsome to sight, smell, and respiration. Oh, cried the inspector, who can live here? A most dangerous conspirator, a man we are ordered to keep the most strict watch over, as he is daring and resolute. He is alone? Certainly. How long has he been there? Nearly a year. Was he placed here when he first arrived? No, not until he attempted to kill the turkey. Who took his food to him? To kill the turkey? Yes, the very one who is lighting us. Is it not true, Antoine? Asked the governor. True enough. He wanted to kill me, returned the turkey. He must be mad, said the inspector. He is worse than that. He is a devil, returned the turkey. Shall I complain of him? Demanded the inspector. Oh, no, it is useless. Besides, he is almost mad now, and in another year he will be quite so. So much the better for him. He will suffer less, said the inspector. He was, as this remark shows, a man full of philanthropy, and in every way fit for his office. You are right, sir, replied the governor, and this remark proves that you have deeply considered the subject. Now we have in a dungeon about 20 feet distant, and to which you descend by another stair, an old abb, formerly leader of a party in Italy, who has been here since 1811, and in 1813 he went mad, and the change is astonishing. He used to weep, he now laughs, he grew thin, he now grows fat. You had better see him, for his madness is amusing. I will see them both, returned the inspector. I must conscientiously perform my duty. This was the inspector's first visit. He wished to display his authority. Let us visit this one first, added he. By all means, replied the governor, and he signed to the turnkey to open the door. At the sound of the key turning in the lock, and the creaking of the hinges, Dance, who was crouched in a corner of the dungeon, from where he could see the ray of light that came through a narrow iron grating above, raised his head, seeing a stranger, escorted by 2 turnkeys holding torches and accompanied by 2 soldiers, and to whom the governor spoke bareheaded. Dance, who guessed the truth, and that the moment to address himself to the superior authorities was come, sprang forward with clasped hands. The soldiers interposed their bayonets, for they thought that he was about to attack the inspector, and the latter recoiled 2 or 3 steps. Dance saw that he was looked upon as dangerous. Then, infusing all the humility he possessed into his eyes and voice, he addressed the inspector, and sought to inspire him with pity. The inspector listened attentively, then, turning to the governor, observed, "He will become religious. He is already more gentle. He is afraid," and retreated before the bayonets. Madmen are not afraid of anything. I made some curious observations on this at Charenton. Then, turning to the prisoner, "What is it you want?" said he. "I want to know what crime I have committed, to be tried, and if I am guilty, to be shot, if innocent, to be set at liberty." "Are you well fed?" said the inspector. "I believe so. I don't know. It's of no consequence. What matters really, not only to me, but to officers of justice and the king, is that an innocent man should languish in prison, the victim of an infamous denunciation, to die here cursing his executioners." "You are very humble today," remarked the governor. "You are not so always. The other day, for instance, when you tried to kill the turnkey." "It is true, sir, and I beg his pardon, for he has always been very good to me, but I was mad." "And you are not so any longer?" "No, captivity has subdued me. I have been here so long, so long." "When were you arrested, then?" asked the inspector. "The 28th of February, 1815, at 2:30 in the afternoon. Today is the 30th of July, 1816. Why, it is but 17 months. "Only 17 months," replied Dance. "Oh, you do not know what is 17 months in prison. 17 ages rather, especially to a man who, like me, had arrived at the summit of his ambition, to a man who, like me, was on the point of marrying the woman he adored, who saw an honorable career opened before him, and who loses all in an instant, who sees his prospects destroyed, and is ignorant of the fate of his affianced wife, and whether his aged father be still living. 17 months' captivity to a sailor accustomed to the boundless ocean is a worse punishment than human crime ever merited. Have pity on me, then, and ask for me, not intelligence, but a trial, not pardon, but a verdict. A trial, sir. I ask only for a trial, that, surely, cannot be denied to one who is accused." "We shall see," said the inspector. Then, turning to the governor, "On my word, the poor devil touches me. You must show me the proofs against him." "Certainly, but you will find terrible charges." "Monsieur," continued Dance, "I know it is not in your power to release me, but you can plead for me. You can have me tried, and that is all I ask. Let me know my crime, and the reason why I was condemned. Uncertainty is worse than all." "Go on with the lights," said the inspector. "Monsieur," cried Dance, "I can tell by your voice you are touched with pity. Tell me at least to hope." "I cannot tell you that," replied the inspector. "I can only promise to examine into your case." "Oh, I am free. Then I am saved." "Who arrested you?" "M. Villefort." "See him, and hear what he says." "M. Villefort is no longer at Marseilles, he is now at Toulouse." "I am no longer surprised at my detention," murmured Dance, "since my only protector is removed." "Had M. de Villefort any cause of personal dislike to you?" "None. On the contrary, he was very kind to me." "I can, then, rely on the notes he has left concerning you?" "Entirely." "That is well. Wait patiently, then." Dance fell on his knees and prayed earnestly. The door closed, but this time a fresh inmate was left with Dance hope. "Will you see the register at once?" asked the governor, "or proceed to the other cell?" "Let us visit them all," said the inspector. "If I once went up those stairs, I should never have the courage to come down again. Ah, this one is not like the other, and his madness is less affecting than this one's display of reason. What is his folly? He fancies he possesses an immense treasure. The first year he offered government 1,000,000 of francs for his release, the second, 2, the third, 3, and so on progressively. He is now in his 5th year of captivity. He will ask to speak to you in private, and offer you 5 millions. How curious! What is his name?" "The Abbe Faria." "No 27," said the inspector. "It is here. Unlock the door, Antoine." The turnkey obeyed, and the inspector gazed curiously into the chamber of the mad ab, as the prisoner was usually called. In the center of the cell, in a circle traced with a fragment of plaster detached from the wall, sat a man whose tattered garments scarcely covered him. He was drawing in this circle geometrical lines, and seemed as much absorbed in his problem as Archimedes was when the soldier of Marcellus slew him. He did not move at the sound of the door, and continued his calculations until the flash of the torches lighted up with an unwonted glare the somber walls of his cell. Then, raising his head, he perceived with astonishment the number of persons present. He hastily seized the coverlet of his bed and wrapped it round him. "What is it you want?" said the inspector. "I, monsieur," replied the abbe with an air of surprise, "I want nothing." "You do not understand," continued the inspector. "I am sent here by government to visit the prison and hear the requests of the prisoners." "Oh, that is different," cried the abbe, "and we shall understand each other, I hope." "There, now," whispered the governor, "it is just as I told you." "Monsieur," continued the prisoner, "I am the Abbe Faria, born at Rome. I was for 20 years Cardinal Spada's secretary. I was arrested, why, I know not, toward the beginning of the year 1811. Since then I have demanded my liberty from the Italian and French government." "Why from the French government?" "Because I was arrested at Bambino, and I presume that, like Milan and Florence, Bambino has become the capital of some French department." "Ah," said the inspector, "you have not the latest news from Italy?" "My information dates from the day on which I was arrested," returned the Abbe Faria, "and as the emperor had created the kingdom of Rome for his infant son, I presume that he has realized the dream of Machiavelli and Caesar Borgia, which was to make Italy a united kingdom." "Monsieur," returned the inspector, "Providence has changed this gigantic plan you advocate so warmly. It is the only means of rendering Italy strong, happy, and independent." "Very possibly. Only I am not come to discuss politics, but to inquire if you have anything to ask or to complain of." "The food is the same as in other prisons, that is very bad. The lodging is very unhealthful, but, on the whole, passable for a dungeon. But it is not that which I wish to speak of, but a secret I have to reveal of the greatest importance." "We are coming to the point," whispered the governor. "It is for that reason I am delighted to see you," continued the abbe, "although you have disturbed me in a most important calculation, which, if it succeeded, would possibly change Newton's system. Could you allow me a few words in private?" "What did I tell you?" said the governor. "You knew him," returned the inspector with a smile. "What you ask is impossible, monsieur," continued he, addressing Faria. "But," said the abbe, "I would speak to you of a large sum amounting to 5 millions. "The very sum you named," whispered the inspector in his turn. "However," continued Faria, seeing that the inspector was about to depart, "it is not absolutely necessary for us to be alone. The governor can be present." "Unfortunately," said the governor, "I know beforehand what you are about to say. It concerns your treasures, does it not?" Faria fixed his eyes on him with an expression that would have convinced anyone else of his sanity. "Of course," said he. "Of what else should I speak?" "Mr. Inspector," continued the governor, "I can tell you the story as well as he, for it has been dinned in my ears for the last 4 or 5 years." "That proves," returned the abbe, "that you are like those of Holy Writ, who having eyes see not, and having ears hear not." "My dear sir, the government is rich and does not want your treasures," replied the inspector. "Keep them until you are liberated." The abbe's eyes glistened. He seized the inspector's hand. "But what if I am not liberated?" cried he, "and am detained here until my death? This treasure will be lost. Had not government better profit by it? I will offer 6 millions, and I will content myself with the rest, if they will only give me my liberty." "On my word," said the inspector in a low tone, "had I not been told beforehand that this man was mad, I should believe what he says." "I am not mad," replied Faria, with that acuteness of hearing peculiar to prisoners. "The treasure I speak of really exists, and I offer to sign an agreement with you, in which I promise to lead you to the spot where you shall dig, and if I deceive you, bring me here again. I ask no more." The governor laughed. Is the spot far from here? 100 leagues. It is not ill-planned, said the governor. If all the prisoners took it into their heads to travel 100 leagues, and their guardians consented to accompany them, they would have a capital chance of escaping. The scheme is well known, said the inspector, and the abb's plan has not even the merit of originality. Then turning to Feria, I inquired if you are well fed. Said he, swear to me, replied Feria, to free me if what I tell you prove true, and I will stay here while you go to the spot. Are you well fed? Repeated the inspector. Monsieur, you run no risk, for, as I told you, I will stay here, so there is no chance of my escaping. You do not reply to my question, replied the inspector impatiently. Nor you to mine, cried the abbe. You will not accept my gold, I will keep it for myself. You refuse me my liberty, God will give it me. And the abbe, casting away his coverlet, resumed his place and continued his calculations. What is he doing there? Said the inspector. Counting his treasures, replied the governor. Ferrier replied to this sarcasm with a glance of profound contempt. They went out. The turnkey closed the door behind them. He was wealthy once, perhaps, said the inspector, or dreamed he was and awoke mad. After all, said the inspector, if he had been rich, he would not have been here. So the matter ended for the Abbe Feria. He remained in his cell, and this visit only increased the belief in his insanity. Caligula or Nero, those treasure-seekers, those desirers of the impossible, would have accorded to the poor wretch, in exchange for his wealth, the liberty he so earnestly prayed for. But the kings of modern times, restrained by the limits of mere probability, have neither courage nor desire. They fear the ear that hears their orders and the eye that scrutinizes their actions. Formerly they believed themselves sprung from Jupiter and shielded by their birth, but nowadays they are not inviolable. It has always been against the policy of despotic governments to suffer the victims of their persecutions to reappear. As the Inquisition rarely allowed its victims to be seen with their limbs distorted and their flesh lacerated by torture, so madness is always concealed in its cell, from where, should it depart, it is conveyed to some gloomy hospital, where the doctor has no thought for man or mind in the mutilated being the jailer delivers to him. The very madness of the Abbe Feria, gone mad in prison, condemned him to perpetual captivity. Illustration. Examining the register, the inspector kept his word with Dance. He examined the register, and found the following note concerning him. Edmond Dance, violent Bonapartist, took an active part in the return from Elba. The greatest watchfulness and care to be exercised. This note was in a different hand from the rest, which showed that it had been added since his confinement. The inspector could not contend against this accusation. He simply wrote, "Nothing to be done." This visit had infused new vigor into Dance. He had, till then, forgotten the date, but now, with a fragment of plaster, he wrote the date, 30th July, 1816, and made a mark every day, in order not to lose his reckoning again. Days and weeks passed away, then months. Dance still waited. He at first expected to be freed in a fortnight. This fortnight expired. He decided that the inspector would do nothing until his return to Paris, and that he would not reach there until his circuit was finished. He therefore fixed 3 months. 3 months passed away, then 6 more. Finally 10 months and a half had gone by and no favorable change had taken place, and Dance began to fancy the inspector's visit but a dream, an illusion of the brain. At the expiration of a year the governor was transferred. He had obtained charge of the fortress at Ham. He took with him several of his subordinates, and amongst them Dance, jailer. A new governor arrived. It would have been too tedious to acquire the names of the prisoners. He learned their numbers instead. Chapter 15. Number 34 and number 27. Dance passed through all the stages of torture natural to prisoners in suspense. He was sustained at first by that pride of conscious innocence which is the sequence to hope. Then he began to doubt his own innocence, which justified in some measure the governor's belief in his mental alienation, and then, relaxing his sentiment of pride, he addressed his supplications, not to God, but to man. God is always the last resource. Unfortunates, who ought to begin with God, do not have any hope in him till they have exhausted all other means of deliverance. Dance asked to be removed from his present dungeon into another, evening if it were darker and deeper, for a change, however disadvantageous, was still a change, and would afford him some amusement. He entreated to be allowed to walk about, to have fresh air, books, and writing materials. His requests were not granted, but he went on asking all the same. He accustomed himself to speaking to the new jailer, although the latter was, if possible, more taciturn than the old one, but still, to speak to a man, evening though mute, was something. Dance spoke for the sake of hearing his own voice. He had tried to speak when alone, but the sound of his voice terrified him. Often, before his captivity, Dante's mind had revolted at the idea of assemblages of prisoners made up of thieves, vagabonds, and murderers. He now wished to be amongst them, in order to see some other face besides that of his jailer. He sighed for the gallows, with the infamous costume, the chain, and the brand on the shoulder. The gala slaves breathed the fresh air of heaven, and saw each other. They were very happy. He besought the jailer one day to let him have a companion, were it evening the mad app. The jailer, though rough and hardened by the constant sight of so much suffering, was yet a man. At the bottom of his heart he had often had a feeling of pity for this unhappy young man, who suffered so, and he laid the request of number 34 before the governor, but the latter sapiently imagined that Dance wished to conspire or attempt an escape, and refused his request. Dance had exhausted all human resources, and he then turned to God. All the pious ideas that had been so long forgotten returned. He recollected the prayers his mother had taught him, and discovered a new meaning in every word, for in prosperity prayers seem but a mere medley of words, until misfortune comes and the unhappy sufferer first understands the meaning of the sublime language in which he invokes the pity of heaven. He prayed, and prayed aloud, no longer terrified at the sound of his own voice, for he fell into a sort of ecstasy. He laid every action of his life before the Almighty, proposed tasks to accomplish, and at the end of every prayer introduced the entreaty oftener addressed to man than to God. Forgive us our trespasses as we forgive them that trespass against us. Yet in spite of his earnest prayers, Dance remained a prisoner. Then gloom settled heavily upon him. Dance was a man of great simplicity of thought, and without education he could not, therefore, in the solitude of his dungeon, traverse in mental vision the history of the ages, bring to life the nations that had perished, and rebuild the ancient cities so vast and stupendous in the light of the imagination, and that pass before the eye glowing with celestial colors in Martin's Babylonian pictures. He could not do this, he whose past life was so short, whose present so melancholy, and his future so doubtful. 19 years of light to reflect upon in eternal darkness. No distraction could come to his aid. His energetic spirit, that would have exulted in thus revisiting the past, was imprisoned like an eagle in a cage. He clung to one idea, that of his happiness, destroyed, without apparent cause, by an unheard of fatality. He considered and reconsidered this idea, devoured it so to speak, as the implacable Ugolino devours the skull of Archbishop Roger in the Inferno of Dante. Rage supplanted religious fervor. Dance uttered blasphemies that made his jailer recoil with horror, dashed himself furiously against the walls of his prison, wreaked his anger upon everything, and chiefly upon himself, so that the least thing, a grain of sand, a straw, or a breath of air that annoyed him, led to paroxysms of fury. Then the letter that Villefort had showed to him recurred to his mind, and every line gleamed forth in fiery letters on the wall like the mean, Tekel a parson of Belshazzar. He told himself that it was the enmity of man, and not the vengeance of heaven, that had thus plunged him into the deepest misery. He consigned his unknown persecutors to the most horrible tortures he could imagine, and found them all insufficient, because after torture came death, and after death, if not repose, at least the boon of unconsciousness. By dint of constantly dwelling on the idea that tranquility was death, and if punishment were the end in view other tortures than death must be invented, he began to reflect on suicide. Unhappy he, who, on the brink of misfortune, broods over ideas like these. Before him is a dead sea, that stretches in azure calm before the eye, but he who unwarily ventures within its embrace finds himself struggling with a monster that would drag him down to perdition. Once thus ensnared, unless the protecting hand of God snatch him from there, all is over, and his struggles but tend to hasten his destruction. This state of mental anguish is, however, less terrible than the sufferings that precede or the punishment that possibly will follow. There is a sort of consolation at the contemplation of the yawning abyss, at the bottom of which lie darkness and obscurity. Edmund found some solace in these ideas. All his sorrows, all his sufferings, with their train of gloomy spectres, fled from his cell when the angel of death seemed about to enter. Dance reviewed his past life with composure, and, looking forward with terror to his future existence, chose that middle line that seemed to afford him a refuge. "Sometimes," said he, "in my voyages, when I was a man and commanded other men, I have seen the heavens overcast, the sea rage and foam, the storm arise, and, like a monstrous bird, beating the two horizons with its wings. Then I felt that my vessel was a vain refuge, that trembled and shook before the tempest." Soon the fury of the waves and the sight of the sharp rocks announced the approach of death, and death then terrified me, and I used all my skill and intelligence as a man and a sailor to struggle against the wrath of God. But I did so because I was happy, because I had not courted death, because to be cast upon a bed of rocks and seaweed seemed terrible, because I was unwilling that I, a creature made for the service of God, should serve for food to the gulls and ravens. But now it is different. I have lost all that bound me to life. Death smiles and invites me to repose. I die after my own manner. I die exhausted and broken-spirited as I fall asleep when I have paced 3,000 times round my cell, that is 30,000 steps, or about 10 leagues. No sooner had this idea taken possession of him than he became more composed, arranged his couch to the best of his power, ate little and slept less, and found existence almost supportable because he felt that he could throw it off at pleasure, like a worn-out garment. Two methods of self-destruction were at his disposal. He could hang himself with his handkerchief to the window bars, or refuse food, and die of starvation. But the first was repugnant to him. Dance had always entertained the greatest horror of pirates, who are hung up to the yardarm. He would not die by what seemed an infamous death. He resolved to adopt the second, and began, that day, to carry out his resolve. 0185 Nearly 4 years had passed away. At the end of the second he had ceased to mark the lapse of time. Dance said, "I wished to die," and had chosen the manner of his death, and fearful of changing his mind, he had taken an oath to die. "When my morning and evening meals are brought," thought he, "I will cast them out of the window, and they will think that I have eaten them." He kept his word. Twice a day he cast out, through the barred aperture, the provisions his jailer brought him, at first gaily, then with deliberation, and at last with regret. Nothing but the recollection of his oath gave him strength to proceed. Hunger made viands once repugnant, now acceptable. He held the plate in his hand for an hour at a time, and gazed thoughtfully at the morsel of bad meat, of tainted fish, of black and mouldy bread. It was the last yearning for life contending with the resolution of despair. Then his dungeon seemed less somber, his prospects less desperate. He was still young. He was only 24 or 25. He had nearly 50 years to live. What unforeseen events may not open his prison door, and restore him to liberty? Then he raised to his lips the repast that, like a voluntary Tantalus, he refused himself. But he thought of his oath, and he would not break it. He persisted until, at last, he had not sufficient strength to rise and cast his supper out of the loophole. The next morning he could not see or hear. The jailer feared he was dangerously ill. Edmund hoped he was dying. Thus the day passed away. Edmund felt a sort of stupor creeping over him, which brought with it a feeling almost of content. The gnawing pain at his stomach had ceased. His thirst had abated. When he closed his eyes he saw myriads of lights dancing before them like the will-o'-the-wisps that play about the marshes. It was the twilight of that mysterious country called death. Suddenly, about 9 o'clock in the evening, Edmund heard a hollow sound in the wall against which he was lying. So many loathsome animals inhabited the prison, that their noise did not, in general, awake him. but whether abstinence had quickened his faculties, or whether the noise was really louder than usual, Edmund raised his head and listened. It was a continual scratching, as if made by a huge claw, a powerful tooth, or some iron instrument attacking the stones. Although weakened, the young man's brain instantly responded to the idea that haunts all prisoners, liberty. It seemed to him that heaven had at length taken pity on him, and had sent this noise to warn him on the very brink of the abyss. Perhaps one of those beloved ones he had so often thought of was thinking of him, and striving to diminish the distance that separated them. No, no, doubtless he was deceived, and it was but one of those dreams that foreign death. Edmund still heard the sound. It lasted nearly 3 hours. He then heard a noise of something falling, and all was silent. Some hours afterwards it began again, nearer and more distinct. Edmund was intensely interested. Suddenly the jailer entered. For a week since he had resolved to die, and during the 4 days that he had been carrying out his purpose, Edmund had not spoken to the attendant, had not answered him when he inquired what was the matter with him, and turned his face to the wall when he looked too curiously at him. But now the jailer may hear the noise and put an end to it, and so destroy a ray of something like hope that soothed his last moments. The jailer brought him his breakfast. Dance raised himself up and began to talk about everything, about the bad quality of the food, about the coldness of his dungeon, grumbling and complaining, in order to have an excuse for speaking louder, and wearying the patience of his jailer, who out of kindness of heart had brought broth and white bread for his prisoner. Fortunately, he fancied that Dance was delirious, and placing the food on the rickety table, he withdrew. Edmund listened, and the sound became more and more distinct. There can be no doubt about it, thought he. It is some prisoner who is striving to obtain his freedom. Oh, if I were only there to help him! Suddenly another idea took possession of his mind, so used to misfortune that it was scarcely capable of hope. The idea that the noise was made by workmen the governor had ordered to repair the neighboring dungeon. It was easy to ascertain this, but how could he risk the question? It was easy to call his jailer's attention to the noise, and watch his countenance as he listened, but may he not by this means destroy hopes far more important than the short-lived satisfaction of his own curiosity? Unfortunately, Edmund's brain was still so feeble that he could not bend his thoughts to anything in particular. He saw but one means of restoring lucidity and clearness to his judgment. He turned his eyes towards the soup which the jailer had brought, rose, staggered towards it, raised the vessel to his lips, and drank off the contents with a feeling of indescribable pleasure. He had the resolution to stop with this. He had often heard that shipwrecked persons had died through having eagerly devoured too much food. Edmund replaced on the table the bread he was about to devour, and returned to his couch. He did not wish to die. He soon felt that his ideas became again collected. He could think, and strengthen his thoughts by reasoning. Then he said to himself, I must put this to the test, but without compromising anybody. If it is a workman, I need but knock against the wall, and he will cease to work, in order to find out who is knocking, and why he does so. But as his occupation is sanctioned by the governor, he will soon resume it. If, on the contrary, it is a prisoner, the noise I make will alarm him. He will cease, and not begin again until he thinks everyone is asleep. Edmund rose again, but this time his legs did not tremble, and his sight was clear. He went to a corner of his dungeon, detached a stone, and with it knocked against the wall where the sound came. He struck thrice. At the first blow the sound ceased, as if by magic. Edmund listened intently. An hour passed, 2 hours passed, and no sound was heard from the wall. All was silent there, full of hope. Edmund swallowed a few mouthfuls of bread and water, and, thanks to the vigor of his constitution, found himself well near recovered. The day passed away in utter silence. Night came without recurrence of the noise. It is a prisoner, said Edmund joyfully. His brain was on fire, and life and energy returned. The night passed in perfect silence. Edmund did not close his eyes. In the morning the jailer brought him fresh provisions. He had already devoured those of the previous day. He ate these, listening anxiously for the sound, walking round and round his cell, shaking the iron bars of the loophole, restoring vigor and agility to his limbs by exercise, and so preparing himself for his future destiny. At intervals he listened to learn if the noise had not begun again, and grew impatient at the prudence of the prisoner, who did not guess he had been disturbed by a captive as anxious for liberty as himself. 3 days passed, 72 long tedious hours which he counted off by minutes. At length one evening, as the jailer was visiting him for the last time that night, Dance, with his ear for the 100th time at the wall, fancied he heard an almost imperceptible movement among the stones. He moved away, walked up and down his cell to collect his thoughts, and then went back and listened. The matter was no longer doubtful. Something was at work on the other side of the wall. The prisoner had discovered the danger, and had substituted a lever for a chisel. Encouraged by this discovery, Edmund determined to assist the indefatigable laborer. He began by moving his bed, and looked around for anything with which he could pierce the wall, penetrate the moist cement, and displace a stone. He saw nothing. He had no knife or sharp instrument. The window grating was of iron, but he had too often assured himself of its solidity. All his furniture consisted of a bed, a chair, a table, a pail, and a jug. The bed had iron clamps, but they were screwed to the wood, and it would have required a screwdriver to take them off. The table and chair had nothing. The pail had once possessed a handle, but that had been removed. Dance had but one resource, which was to break the jug and with one of the sharp fragments attack the wall. He let the jug fall on the floor, and it broke in pieces. Dance concealed 2 or 3 of the sharpest fragments in his bed, leaving the rest on the floor. The breaking of his jug was too natural an accident to excite suspicion. Edmund had all the night to work in, but in the darkness he could not do much, and he soon felt that he was working against something very hard. He pushed back his bed and waited for day. All night he heard the subterranean workman, who continued to mine his way. Day came, the jailer entered. Dance told him that the jug had fallen from his hands while he was drinking, and the jailer went grumblingly to fetch another, without giving himself the trouble to remove the fragments of the broken one. He returned speedily, advised the prisoner to be more careful, and departed. Dance heard joyfully the key grate in the lock. He listened until the sound of steps died away, and then, hastily displacing his bed, saw by the faint light that penetrated into his cell that he had labored uselessly the previous evening in attacking the stone instead of removing the plaster that surrounded it. The damp had rendered it friable, and Dance was able to break it off. In small morsels, it is true, but at the end of half an hour he had scraped off a handful. A mathematician may have calculated that in 2 years, supposing that the rock was not encountered, a passage 20 feet long and 2 feet broad may be formed. The prisoner reproached himself with not having thus employed the hours he had passed in vain hopes, prayer, and despondency. During the 6 years that he had been imprisoned, what may he not have accomplished? This idea imparted new energy, and in 3 days he had succeeded, with the utmost precaution, in removing the cement and exposing the stonework. The wall was built of rough stones, among which, to give strength to the structure, blocks of hewn stone were at intervals embedded. It was one of these he had uncovered, and which he must remove from its socket. Dance strove to do this with his nails, but they were too weak. The fragments of the jug broke, and after an hour of useless toil, Dance paused with anguish on his brow. Was he to be thus stopped at the beginning? And was he to wait inactive until his fellow workman had completed his task? Suddenly an idea occurred to him. He smiled, and the perspiration dried on his forehead. The jailer always brought Dance soup in an iron saucepan. This saucepan contained soup for both prisoners, for Dance had noticed that it was either quite full or half empty according as the turnkey gave it to him or to his companion first. The handle of this saucepan was of iron. Dance would have given 10 years of his life in exchange for it. The jailer was accustomed to pour the contents of the saucepan into Dance's plate, and Dance, after eating his soup with a wooden spoon, washed the plate, which thus served for every day. Now, when evening came, Dance put his plate on the ground near the door. The jailer, as he entered, stepped on it and broke it. This time he could not blame Dance. He was wrong to leave it there, but the jailer was wrong not to have looked before him. The jailer, therefore, only grumbled. Then he looked about for something to pour the soup into. Dance's entire dinner service consisted of one plate. There was no alternative. "Leave the saucepan," said Dance. "You can take it away when you bring me my breakfast." This advice was to the jailer's taste, as it spared him the necessity of making another trip. He left the saucepan. Dance was beside himself with joy. He rapidly devoured his food, and after waiting an hour, lest the jailer should change his mind and return, he removed his bed, took the handle of the saucepan, inserted the point between the hewn stone and rough stones of the wall, and employed it as a lever. A slight oscillation showed Dance that all went well. At the end of an hour the stone was extricated from the wall, leaving a cavity a foot and a half in diameter. Dance carefully collected the plaster, carried it into the corner of his cell, and covered it with earth. Then, wishing to make the best use of his time while he had the means of labor, he continued to work without ceasing. At the dawn of day he replaced the stone, pushed his bed against the wall, and lay down. The breakfast consisted of a piece of bread. The jailer entered and placed the bread on the table. "Well, don't you intend to bring me another plate?" said Dance. "No," replied the turnkey. "You destroy everything. First you break your jug, then you make me break your plate. If all the prisoners followed your example, the government would be ruined. I shall leave you the saucepan and pour your soup into that. So for the future I hope you will not be so destructive." Dance raised his eyes to heaven and clasped his hands beneath the coverlet. He felt more gratitude for the possession of this piece of iron than he had ever felt for anything. He had noticed, however, that the prisoner on the other side had ceased to labor. No matter, this was a greater reason for proceeding. If his neighbor would not come to him, he would go to his neighbor. All day he toiled on untiringly, and by the evening he had succeeded in extracting 10 handfuls of plaster and fragments of stone. When the hour for his jailer's visit arrived, Dance straightened the handle of the saucepan as well as he could and placed it in its accustomed place. The turnkey poured his ration of soup into it, together with the fish. For thrice a week the prisoners were deprived of meat. This would have been a method of reckoning time had not Dance long ceased to do so. Having poured out the soup, the turnkey retired. Dance wished to ascertain whether his neighbor had really ceased to work. He listened. All was silent, as it had been for the last 3 days. Dance sighed. It was evident that his neighbor distrusted him. However, he toiled on all the night without being discouraged, but after 2 or 3 hours he encountered an obstacle. The iron made no impression, but met with a smooth surface. Dance touched it, and found that it was a beam. This beam crossed, or rather blocked up, the hole Dance had made. It was necessary, therefore, to dig above or under it. The unhappy young man had not thought of this. "Oh, my God, murmured he, "I have so earnestly prayed to you, that I hoped my prayers had been heard. After having deprived me of my liberty, after having deprived me of death, after having recalled me to existence, my God, have pity on me, and do not let me die in despair." "Who talks of God and despair at the same time?" said a voice that seemed to come from beneath the earth, and, deadened by the distance, sounded hollow and sepulchral in the young man's ears. Edmund's hair stood on end, and he rose to his knees. "Ah," said he, "I hear a human voice." Edmund had not heard anyone speak save his jailer for 4 or 5 years, and a jailer is no man to a prisoner. He is a living door, a barrier of flesh and blood, adding strength to restraints of oak and iron. "In the name of heaven," cried Dance, "speak again, though the sound of your voice terrifies me." "Who are you? Who are you?" said the voice. "An unhappy prisoner," replied Dance, who made no hesitation in answering. "Of what country?" "A Frenchman." "Your name?" "Edmund Dance." "Your profession?" "A sailor." "How long have you been here?" "Since the 28th of February, 1815. "Your crime?" "I am innocent." "But of what are you accused?" of having conspired to aid the emperor's return. What, for the emperor's return? The emperor is no longer on the throne, then? He abdicated at Fontainebleau in 1814, and was sent to the island of Elba. But how long have you been here that you are ignorant of all this? Since 1811. Dance shuddered. This man had been 4 years longer than himself in prison. Do not dig any more, said the voice. Only tell me how high up is your excavation? On a level with the floor. How is it concealed? Behind my bed. Has your bed been moved since you have been a prisoner? No. What does your chamber open on? A corridor. And the corridor on a court. Alas, murmured the voice. Oh, what is the matter? Cried Dance. I have made a mistake owing to an error in my plans. I took the wrong angle, and have come out 15 feet from where I intended. I took the wall you are mining for the outer wall of the fortress, but then you would be close to the sea. That is what I hoped. And supposing you had succeeded, I should have thrown myself into the sea, gained one of the islands near here, the Isle de Dôme or the Isle de Tiburon, and then I should have been safe. Could you have swum so far? Heaven would have given me strength, but now all is lost. All, yes, stop up your excavation carefully, do not work any more, and wait until you hear from me. Tell me, at least, who you are. I am no, 27. You mistrust me. Then, said Dance. Edmund fancied he heard a bitter laugh resounding from the depths. Oh, I am a Christian, cried Dance, guessing instinctively that this man meant to abandon him. I swear to you by him who died for us that naught shall induce me to breathe one syllable to my jailers, but I conjure you do not abandon me. If you do, I swear to you, for I have got to the end of my strength, that I will dash my brains out against the wall, and you will have my death to reproach yourself with. How old are you? Your voice is that of a young man. I do not know my age, for I have not counted the years I have been here. All I do know is that I was just 19 when I was arrested, the 28th of February, 1815. Not quite 26, murmured the voice. At that age he cannot be a traitor. Oh, no, no, cried Dance. I swear to you again, rather than betray you, I would allow myself to be hacked in pieces. You have done well to speak to me, and ask for my assistance, for I was about to form another plan and leave you. But your age reassures me. I will not forget you. Wait, how long? I must calculate our chances. I will give you the signal, but you will not leave me. You will come to me, or you will let me come to you. We will escape, and if we cannot escape, we will talk. You of those whom you love, and I of those whom I love. You must love somebody? No, I am alone in the world. Then you will love me. If you are young, I will be your comrade. If you are old, I will be your son. I have a father who is 70 if he yet lives. I only love him and a young girl called Mertz. My father has not yet forgotten me, I am sure, but God alone knows if she loves me still. I shall love you as I loved my father. It is well, returned the voice, tomorrow. These few words were uttered with an accent that left no doubt of his sincerity. Dance rose, dispersed the fragments with the same precaution as before, and pushed his bed back against the wall. He then gave himself up to his happiness. He would no longer be alone. He was, perhaps, about to regain his liberty. At the worst, he would have a companion, and captivity that is shared is but half captivity. Plaints made in common are almost prayers, and prayers, where 2 or 3 are gathered together, invoke the mercy of heaven. All day Dance walked up and down his cell. He sat down occasionally on his bed, pressing his hand on his heart. At the slightest noise he bounded towards the door. Once or twice the thought crossed his mind that he may be separated from this unknown, whom he loved already, and then his mind was made up. When the jailer moved his bed and stooped to examine the opening, he would kill him with his water jug. He would be condemned to die, but he was about to die of grief and despair when this miraculous noise recalled him to life. The jailer came in the evening. Dance was on his bed. It seemed to him that thus he better guarded the unfinished opening. Doubtless there was a strange expression in his eyes, for the jailer said, "Come, are you going mad again?" Dance did not answer. He feared that the emotion of his voice would betray him. The jailer went away shaking his head. Night came. Dance hoped that his neighbor would profit by the silence to address him, but he was mistaken. The next morning, however, just as he removed his bed from the wall, he heard 3 knocks. He threw himself on his knees. "Is it you?" said he. "I am here. Is your jailer gone?" "Yes," said Dance. "He will not return until the evening, so that we have 12 hours before us." "I can work, then," said the voice. "Oh, yes, yes, this instant, I entreat you." In a moment that part of the floor on which Dance was resting his 2 hands, as he knelt with his head in the opening, suddenly gave way. He drew back smartly, while a mass of stones and earth disappeared in a hole that opened beneath the aperture he himself had formed. Chapter 16. A learned Italian. Seizing in his arms the friend so long and ardently desired, Dance almost carried him towards the window, in order to obtain a better view of his features by the aid of the imperfect light that struggled through the grating. He was a man of small stature, with hair blanched rather by suffering and sorrow than by age. He had a deep-set, penetrating eye, almost buried beneath the thick gray eyebrow, and a long and still black beard reaching down to his breast. His thin face, deeply furrowed by care, and the bold outline of his strongly marked features, betokened a man more accustomed to exercise his mental faculties than his physical strength. Large drops of perspiration were now standing on his brow, while the garments that hung about him were so ragged that one could only guess at the pattern upon which they had originally been fashioned. The stranger may have numbered 60 or 65 years, but a certain briskness and appearance of vigor in his movements made it probable that he was aged more from captivity than the course of time. He received the enthusiastic greeting of his young acquaintance with evident pleasure, as though his chilled affections were rekindled and invigorated by his contact with one so warm and ardent. He thanked him with grateful cordiality for his kindly welcome, although he must at that moment have been suffering bitterly to find another dungeon where he had fondly reckoned on discovering a means of regaining his liberty. "Let us first see," said he, "whether it is possible to remove the traces of my entrance here. Our future tranquility depends upon our jailers being entirely ignorant of it." Advancing to the opening, he stooped and raised the stone easily in spite of its weight. Then, fitting it into its place, he said, "You removed this stone very carelessly, but I suppose you had no tools to aid you." "Why," exclaimed Dance, with astonishment, "do you possess any?" "I made myself some, and with the exception of a file, I have all that are necessary: a chisel, pincers, and lever." "Oh, how I should like to see these products of your industry and patience." "Well, in the first place, here is my chisel." So saying, he displayed a sharp, strong blade, with a handle made of beechwood. "And with what did you contrive to make that?" inquired Dance. "With one of the clamps of my bedstead, and this very tool has sufficed me to hollow out the road by which I came here, a distance of about 50 feet. 50 feet, responded Dance, almost terrified. "Do not speak so loud, young man, don't speak so loud." It frequently occurs in a state prison like this that persons are stationed outside the doors of the cells purposely to overhear the conversation of the prisoners. "But they believe I am shut up alone here." "That makes no difference." "And you say that you dug your way a distance of 50 feet to get here." "I do. That is about the distance that separates your chamber from mine. Only, unfortunately, I did not curve aright, for want of the necessary geometrical instruments to calculate my scale of proportion. Instead of taking an ellipsis of 40 feet, I made it 50. I expected, as I told you, to reach the outer wall, pierce through it, and throw myself into the sea. I have, however, kept along the corridor on which your chamber opens, instead of going beneath it. My labor is all in vain, for I find that the corridor looks into a courtyard filled with soldiers." "That's true," said Dance, "but the corridor you speak of only bounds one side of my cell. There are 3 others. Do you know anything of their situation? This one is built against the solid rock, and it would take 10 experienced miners, duly furnished with the requisite tools, as many years to perforate it. This adjoins the lower part of the governor's apartments, and were we to work our way through, we should only get into some lock-up cellars, where we must necessarily be recaptured. The fourth and last side of your cell faces on. Stop a minute. Now where does it face? The wall of which he spoke was the one in which was fixed the loophole by which light was admitted to the chamber. This loophole, which gradually diminished in size as it approached the outside to an opening through which a child could not have passed, was for better security furnished with 3 iron bars, so as to quiet all apprehensions evening in the mind of the most suspicious jailer as to the possibility of a prisoner's escape. As the stranger asked the question, he dragged the table beneath the window. "Climb up," said he to Dance. The young man obeyed, mounted on the table, and, divining the wishes of his companion, placed his back securely against the wall and held out both hands. The stranger, whom as yet Dance knew only by the number of his cell, sprang up with an agility by no means to be expected in a person of his years, and, light and steady on his feet as a cat or a lizard, climbed from the table to the outstretched hands of Dance, and from them to his shoulders. Then, bending double, for the ceiling of the dungeon prevented him from holding himself erect, he managed to slip his head between the upper bars of the window, so as to be able to command a perfect view from top to bottom. An instant afterwards he hastily drew back his head, saying, "I thought so," and sliding from the shoulders of Dance as dexterously as he had ascended, he nimbly leaped from the table to the ground. "What was it that you thought?" asked the young man anxiously, in his turn descending from the table. The elder prisoner pondered the matter. "Yes," said he at length, "it is so. This side of your chamber looks out upon a kind of open gallery, where patrols are continually passing, and sentries keep watch day and night." "Are you quite sure of that?" "Certain. I saw the soldier's shape and the top of his musket. That made me draw in my head so quickly, for I was fearful he may also see me." "Well," inquired Dance, "you perceive then the utter impossibility of escaping through your dungeon?" "Then," pursued the young man eagerly, "then," answered the elder prisoner, "the will of God be done." And as the old man slowly pronounced those words, an air of profound resignation spread itself over his careworn countenance. Dance gazed on the man who could thus philosophically resign hopes so long and ardently nourished with an astonishment mingled with admiration. "Tell me, I entreat of you, who and what you are," said he at length. "Never have I met with so remarkable a person as yourself." "Willingly," answered the stranger, "if, truly, you feel any curiosity respecting one, now, alas, powerless to aid you in any way. Say not so. You can console and support me by the strength of your own powerful mind. Pray let me know who you really are." The stranger smiled a melancholy smile. "Then listen," said he. "I am the Abbe Faria, and have been imprisoned, as you know, in the Ch. since the year 1811, previously to which I had been confined for 3 years in the fortress of Fenestrelle. In the year 1811 I was transferred to Piedmont in France. It was at this period I learned that the destiny which seemed subservient to every wish formed by Napoleon had bestowed on him a son, named King of Rome, evening in his cradle. I was very far then from expecting the change you have just informed me of, namely, that 4 years afterwards this colossus of power would be overthrown. Then who reigns in France at this moment? Napoleon Roman II? No, Louis Roman XVIII, the brother of Louis Roman XVI. How inscrutable are the ways of Providence! For what great and mysterious purpose has it pleased Heaven to abase the man once so elevated, and raise up him who was so abased? Dan's whole attention was riveted on a man who could thus forget his own misfortunes while occupying himself with the destinies of others. "Yes, yes," continued he, "'twill be the same as it was in England. After Charles I. Cromwell, after Cromwell, Charles Roman II, and then James Roman II, and then some son-in-law or relation, some Prince of Orange, a stadtholder who becomes a king. Then new concessions to the people, then a constitution, then liberty." "Ah, my friend," said the abbé, turning towards Dance and surveying him with the kindling gaze of a prophet. "You are young, you will see all this come to pass. Probably, if ever I get out of prison." "True," replied Feria. "We are prisoners, but I forget this sometimes, and there are evening moments when my mental vision transports me beyond these walls, and I fancy myself at liberty. But therefore are you here?" "Because in 1807 I dreamed of the very plan Napoleon tried to realize in 1811, because, like Machiavelli, I desired to alter the political face of Italy, and instead of allowing it to be split up into a quantity of petty principalities, each held by some weak or tyrannical ruler, I sought to form one large, compact, and powerful empire. And lastly, because I fancied I had found my Caesar Borgia in a crowned simpleton who feigned to enter into my views only to betray me. It was the plan of Alexander VI and Clement Roman VII, but it will never succeed now, for they attempted it fruitlessly, and Napoleon was unable to complete his work. Italy seems fated to misfortune." And the old man bowed his head. Dance could not understand a man risking his life for such matters. Napoleon certainly he knew something of, inasmuch as he had seen and spoken with him, but of Clement Roman VII and Alexander VI he knew nothing. "Are you not," he asked, "the priest who here in the Château d'If is generally thought to be ill? Mad, you mean, don't you?" "I did not like to say so," answered Dance, smiling. "Well, then," resumed Feria with a bitter smile, "let me answer your question in full, by acknowledging that I am the poor mad prisoner of the Château d'If, for many years permitted to amuse the different visitors with what is said to be my insanity, and, in all probability, I should be promoted to the honor of making sport for the children, if such innocent beings could be found in an abode devoted like this to suffering and despair." Dance remained for a short time mute and motionless. At length he said, "Then you abandon all hope of escape? I perceive its utter impossibility, and I consider it impious to attempt that which the Almighty evidently does not approve." "No, be not discouraged. Would it not be expecting too much to hope to succeed at your first attempt? Why not try to find an opening in another direction from that which has so unfortunately failed?" "Alas, it shows how little notion you can have of all it has cost me to effect a purpose so unexpectedly frustrated, that you talk of beginning over again. In the first place, I was 4 years making the tools I possess, and have been 2 years scraping and digging out earth hard as granite itself. Then what toil and fatigue has it not been to remove huge stones I should once have deemed impossible to loosen? Whole days have I passed in these titanic efforts, considering my labor well repaid if, by night time, I had contrived to carry away a square inch of this hard-bound cement, changed by ages into a substance unyielding as the stones themselves. Then to conceal the mass of earth and rubbish I dug up, I was compelled to break through a staircase, and throw the fruits of my labor into the hollow part of it. But the well is now so completely choked up, that I scarcely think it would be possible to add another handful of dust without leading to discovery. Consider also that I fully believed I had accomplished the end and aim of my undertaking, for which I had so exactly husbanded my strength as to make it just hold out to the termination of my enterprise, and now, at the moment when I reckoned upon success, my hopes are forever dashed from me. No, I repeat again, that nothing shall induce me to renew attempts evidently at variance with the Almighty's pleasure." Dance held down his head, that the other may not see how joy at the thought of having a companion outweighed the sympathy he felt for the failure of the abbé's plans. The abbé sank upon Edmund's bed, while Edmund himself remained standing. Escape had never once occurred to him. There are, truly, some things which appear so impossible that the mind does not dwell on them for an instant. To undermine the ground for 50 feet, to devote 3 years to a labor which, if successful, would conduct you to a precipice overhanging the sea, to plunge into the waves from the height of 50, 60, perhaps 100 feet, at the risk of being dashed to pieces against the rocks, should you have been fortunate enough to have escaped the fire of the sentinels. An evening, supposing all these perils past, then to have to swim for your life a distance of at least 3 miles before you could reach the shore, were difficulties so startling and formidable that Dance had never evening dreamed of such a scheme, resigning himself rather to death. but the sight of an old man clinging to life with so desperate a courage gave a fresh turn to his ideas and inspired him with new courage. Another, older and less strong than he, had attempted what he had not had sufficient resolution to undertake, and had failed only because of an error in calculation. This same person, with almost incredible patience and perseverance, had contrived to provide himself with tools requisite for so unparalleled an attempt. Another had done all this. Why, then, was it impossible to dance? Faria had dug his way through 50 feet. Dance would dig 100. Faria, at the age of 50, had devoted 3 years to the task. He, who was but half as old, would sacrifice 6. Faria, a priest and savant, had not shrunk from the idea of risking his life by trying to swim a distance of 3 miles to one of the islands, Dom, Ratonneau, or Le Maire. Should a hardy sailor, an experienced diver, like himself, shrink from a similar task? Should he, who had so often for mere amusement's sake plunged to the bottom of the sea to fetch up the bright coral branch, hesitate to entertain the same project? He could do it in an hour, and how many times had he, for pure pastime, continued in the water for more than twice as long? At once Dance resolved to follow the brave example of his energetic companion and to remember that what has once been done may be done again. After continuing some time in profound meditation, the young man suddenly exclaimed, "I have found what you were in search of." Faria started. "Have you, truly?" cried he, raising his head with quick anxiety. "Pray, let me know what it is you have discovered." "The corridor through which you have bored your way from the cell you occupy here extends in the same direction as the outer gallery, does it not?" "It does." "And is not above 15 feet from it." "About that. Well, then, I will tell you what we must do. We must pierce through the corridor by forming a side opening about the middle, as it were the top part of a cross. This time you will lay your plans more accurately. We shall get out into the gallery you have described, kill the sentinel who guards it, and make our escape. All we require to ensure success is courage, and that you possess, and strength, which I am not deficient in. As for patience, you have abundantly proved yours. You shall now see me prove mine." "One instant, my dear friend," replied the abb. "It is clear you do not understand the nature of the courage with which I am endowed, and what use I intend making of my strength. As for patience, I consider that I have abundantly exercised that in beginning every morning the task of the night before, and every night renewing the task of the day. But then, young man, and I pray of you to give me your full attention, then I thought I could not be doing anything displeasing to the Almighty in trying to set an innocent being at liberty, one who had committed no offense, and merited not condemnation." "And have your notions changed?" asked Dance with much surprise. "Do you think yourself more guilty in making the attempt since you have encountered me?" "No, neither do I wish to incur guilt. Hitherto I have fancied myself merely waging war against circumstances, not men. I have thought it no sin to bore through a wall, or destroy a staircase, but I cannot so easily persuade myself to pierce a heart or take away a life." A slight movement of surprise escaped Dance. "Is it possible," said he, "that where your liberty is at stake you can allow any such scruple to deter you from obtaining it?" "Tell me," replied Faria, "what has hindered you from knocking down your jailer with a piece of wood torn from your bedstead, dressing yourself in his clothes, and endeavoring to escape?" "Simply the fact that the idea never occurred to me," answered Dance. "Because," said the old man, "the natural repugnance to the commission of such a crime prevented you from thinking of it. And so it ever is, because in simple and allowable things our natural instincts keep us from deviating from the strict line of duty. The tiger, whose nature teaches him to delight in shedding blood, needs but the sense of smell to show him when his prey is within his reach, and by following this instinct he is enabled to measure the leap necessary to permit him to spring on his victim. But man, on the contrary, loathes the idea of blood. It is not alone that the laws of social life inspire him with a shrinking dread of taking life. His natural construction and physiological formation." Dance was confused and silent at this explanation of the thoughts which had unconsciously been working in his mind, or rather soul, for there are two distinct sorts of ideas, those that proceed from the head and those that emanate from the heart. "Since my imprisonment," said Faria, I have thought over all the most celebrated cases of escape on record. They have rarely been successful. Those that have been crowned with full success have been long meditated upon and carefully arranged, such, for instance, as the escape of the Duc de Beaufort from the Château de Vincennes, that of the Abbé du Buquoy from for Elefque, of Latude from the Bastille. Then there are those for which chance sometimes affords opportunity, and those are the best of all. Let us, therefore, wait patiently for some favorable moment, and when it presents itself, profit by it. Ah, said Dance, you may well endure the tedious delay. You were constantly employed in the task you set yourself, and when weary with toil, you had your hopes to refresh and encourage you. I assure you, replied the old man, I did not turn to that source for recreation or support. What did you do then? I wrote or studied. Were you then permitted the use of pens, ink, and paper? Oh, no, answered the abbé, I had none but what I made for myself. You made paper, pens, and ink? Yes. Dance gazed with admiration, but he had some difficulty in believing. Faria saw this. When you pay me a visit in my cell, my young friend, said he, I will show you an entire work, the fruits of the thoughts and reflections of my whole life, many of them meditated over in the shades of the Colosseum at Rome, at the foot of St. Mark's Column at Venice, and on the borders of the Arno at Florence, little imagining at the time that they would be arranged in order within the walls of the Château d'If. The work I speak of is called A Treatise on the Possibility of a General Monarchy in Italy, and will make one large quarto volume. And on what have you written all this? On 2 of my shirts. I invented a preparation that makes linen as smooth and as easy to write on as parchment. You are, then, a chemist? Somewhat. I know Lavoisier, and was the intimate friend of Cabanis. But for such a work you must have needed books. Had you any? I had nearly 5,000 volumes in my library at Rome, but after reading them over many times, I found out that with 150 well-chosen books a man possesses, if not a complete summary of all human knowledge, at least all that a man need really know. I devoted 3 years of my life to reading and studying these 150 volumes, till I knew them nearly by heart, so that since I have been in prison, a very slight effort of memory has enabled me to recall their contents as readily as though the pages were open before me. I could recite you the whole of Thucydides, Xenophon, Plutarch, Titus Livius, Tacitus, Strada, Jornans, Dante, Montaigne, Shakespeare, Spinoza, Machiavelli, and Bossuet. I name only the most important. You are, doubtless, acquainted with a variety of languages, so as to have been able to read all these. Yes, I speak 5 of the modern tongues, that is to say, German, French, Italian, English, and Spanish. By the aid of ancient Greek I learned modern Greek. I don't speak it so well as I could wish, but I am still trying to improve myself. Improve yourself, repeated Dance. Why, how can you manage to do so? Why, I made a vocabulary of the words I knew, turned, returned, and arranged them, so as to enable me to express my thoughts through their medium. I know nearly 1,000 words, which is all that is absolutely necessary, although I believe there are nearly 100,000 in the dictionaries. I cannot hope to be very fluent, but I certainly should have no difficulty in explaining my wants and wishes, and that would be quite as much as I should ever require. Stronger grew the wonder of Dance, who almost fancied he had to do with one gifted with supernatural powers, still hoping to find some imperfection which may bring him down to a level with human beings. He added, then if you were not furnished with pens, how did you manage to write the work you speak of? I made myself some excellent ones, which would be universally preferred to all others if once known. You are aware what huge whitings are served to us on Maker days. Well, I selected the cartilages of the heads of these fishes, and you can scarcely imagine the delight with which I welcomed the arrival of each Wednesday, Friday, and Saturday, as affording me the means of increasing my stock of pens, for I will freely confess that my historical labors have been my greatest solace and relief. While retracing the past, I forget the present, and traversing at will the path of history I cease to remember that I am myself a prisoner. But the ink, said Dance, of what did you make your ink? There was formerly a fireplace in my dungeon, replied Feria. but it was closed up long before I became an occupant of this prison. Still, it must have been many years in use, for it was thickly covered with a coating of soot. This soot I dissolved in a portion of the wine brought to me every Sunday, and I assure you a better ink cannot be desired. For very important notes, for which closer attention is required, I pricked one of my fingers and wrote with my own blood. "And when?" asked Dance. "May I see all this?" "Whenever you please," replied the abb. "Oh, then let it be directly," exclaimed the young man.